The air is cool against your face, and the stone around you seems to hold its own kind of silence. Not empty, not hollow, but patient and lightly damp, as if the cave has been breathing in darkness for longer than memory can comfortably follow. Above you, the limestone ceiling lowers and lifts in slow, uneven folds, and from it hang slender shapes that look almost soft from a distance, though they are made from mineral, water, and time. A bead of water gathers at the tip of one pale stalactite, swelling slowly in the dimness until it releases itself and falls into the unseen quiet below. The sound is small, but in the Waitomo Caves, a single drop can seem to travel through the whole dark chamber. You are standing inside a landscape that was not carved in a hurry, and every surface around you carries the unhurried handwriting of water. It has moved through soil, through roots, through cracks in the limestone, and through rooms hidden from daylight, bringing with it tiny dissolved traces of the rock above. Nothing here announces itself suddenly, because the cave is made from processes too gradual to rush, and the most important events are often no larger than a droplet trembling from a ceiling. In that droplet, there is rain from the surface, carbon from the soil, calcium from ancient stone, and a quiet little exchange with the cave air. Then the water lets go, and almost nothing appears to change, though the cave has changed all the same. The Waitomo Caves lie beneath green hills, where the land folds gently over hidden hollows, and the world above seems ordinary until the ground begins to reveal its depth. Rain falls on pasture and forest, gathers in the soil and moves downward, finding tiny openings in the limestone, following weaknesses that may be no wider than a thread. The stone itself began as old sea floor, made from the accumulated remains of shells, corals, and marine life, pressed and lifted through deep geological time until a place that once belonged to the ocean became land. So even here, beneath hills and roots and quiet grass, the cave carries an ancient memory of the sea. It is a sea turned to stone and slowly opened again by water. As you move farther inward, the light from the entrance thins behind you until it becomes less like light and more like a memory of brightness. The walls no longer reflect the open day, and the shapes ahead become softer, not because they are blurred, but because darkness removes the sharpness from everything it touches. The ceiling seems to drip with pale mineral threads, some thin as hollow reeds, some thicker and older, some joined into rippled curtains that hang in folds like frozen water. You can feel the cave asking for a slower pace, because walking quickly here would feel almost out of place. Every step belongs to the hush, and every breath seems to settle into the limestone. A stalactite begins so quietly that it would be easy to miss the first part of its story. Water sinks through the ground above the cave and meets carbon dioxide in the soil, where roots and tiny organisms breathe into the damp earth. That water becomes a weak carbonic acid, gentle enough to feel like ordinary rain, yet patient enough to dissolve limestone grain by grain as it passes downward. The limestone is mostly calcium carbonate, and in the presence of that mildly acidic water, a little of it enters solution and travels with the droplet into the cave. By the time the water reaches the ceiling, it is carrying stone in a form too fine to see. When the droplet appears overhead, hanging from a tiny point in the ceiling, the cave air begins to draw away some of the carbon dioxide dissolved within it. That small change matters because the chemistry that held the calcium carbonate in solution becomes a little less stable, and a minute ring of calcite may be left behind. It is not a dramatic deposit, not a visible construction at first, but a faint mineral edge that marks where water met air and paused. Another droplet follows, and another, each one carrying a little more dissolved limestone, each one leaving a nearly invisible trace. Over years, and then centuries, the trace becomes a shape. The youngest stalactites can form as delicate hollow tubes, sometimes called soda straws, because the water runs through the center and deposits calcite around the rim of the drop. They may hang like glassy pale needles, fragile in appearance, though their making is steady and precise. As long as the water continues flowing through the tiny inner channel, the straw can grow downward in a narrow, elegant line, each droplet lengthening the tube by an amount too small for the eye to measure. If the channel becomes blocked, water begins to flow along the outside instead. Then the formation thickens, layer upon layer, and the slender tube, slowly becomes a broader stalactite. The cave does not count time the way the surface world counts time, because here, a year can be held inside a film of mineral too fine to separate with the naked eye. On the surface, seasons pass with changing grass, flowering trees, warm rain, cooler rain, and the restless movements of daylight. Inside the cave, those seasons arrive only as small changes in water flow, in chemistry, in the rate at which a droplet gathers and lets go. Sometimes the ceiling is more active after rain, and sometimes it rests through drier periods, with beads lingering longer at the tips of old formations. The cave records all of this softly, not in words, but in layers of calcite. It is comforting, in a quiet way, to imagine that something as still as stone can be made by falling. A drop forms, waits, brightens faintly on the edge of mineral, then slips away into the dark, leaving behind a trace so small it seems almost like an act of faith. The next drop arrives without knowing the last one, and still the work continues, through a repetition so patient it becomes almost tender. There is no hurry in the shape, no urgency in the taper, no need for the cave to finish what it is doing. It simply receives water, releases water, and grows in silence. Above the cave, the Waitomo landscape breathes through soil and root systems, and the rain that begins this underground work may have rested for a while on leaf, moss, or grass before it vanished into the ground. It passes through spaces where air and water meet, where carbon dioxide gathers in the soil, and where the chemistry of dissolution begins as quietly as a thought. The limestone does not resist this process in any dramatic way, because the rock and the water are part of the same long conversation. One gives a little, the other carries a little, and over great lengths of time, a hollow expands beneath the land. The cave is not cut once, but opened slowly, through countless moments of contact. As you look up, the ceiling seems less like a solid boundary, and more like a shoreline between two worlds. Above it, the water is hidden in cracks and pores, moving through stone under the pull of gravity, guided by fractures that may have formed long before the cave chamber became open. Below it, the cave air waits, cool and still, allowing the droplet to lose a little gas and leave a little calcite behind. This meeting place is where stalactites take shape, suspended between the surface and the deeper quiet. They are not decorations added to the cave, but the cave continuing to become itself. Some stalactites are slim and pale, while others have warm tones of honey, cream, amber, or faint brown because the water may carry traces of minerals and organic matter from the soil above. Iron can tint calcite with rusty softness, while other particles may stain a formation gently over time, so that each one holds a subtle record of the land overhead. In low light, these colors do not shout. They appear slowly, as your eyes adjust to the dimness and begin to notice difference inside what first seemed only stone. A formation might be white along one edge and tea-colored along another, as if the cave has painted with diluted earth. Even the color arrives by dripping. The old formations feel almost botanical, though they are entirely mineral, and their names borrow from things the surface mind already knows. There are straws, ribbons, curtains, shawls, columns, and flowstones, all shaped by water moving in slightly different ways. Where droplets fall freely from a point, stalactites lengthen downward, and where water runs over a wall, calcite can spread in rippled sheets that resemble fabric caught in motion. Where a stalactite and a stalagmite eventually meet, they become a column, joining ceiling and floor in one continuous mineral body. Yet nothing here is truly frozen, because even the stillest form may still be growing. On the floor beneath a dripping stalactite, another shape may rise in answer, though it does not hurry to meet the ceiling above. The falling drop strikes or settles, loses more carbon dioxide, and leaves calcite behind, building a stalagmite upward from the cave floor in low, rounded layers. It is easy to imagine them as companions, one descending from above and one rising from below, though their meeting may take longer than any human story can hold. Between them, the drop travels through a brief moment of air, carrying the mineral from one place to another. The space between ceiling and floor becomes a quiet measure of time. The Waitomo Caves are especially known for their glowworms, whose blue-green points of light can gather in the darkness like a low, silent constellation. They are living threads of the cave ecosystem, larvae of small flies that use bioluminescence to attract tiny insects in the damp underground air. Their glow belongs to life rather than stone, and yet it shares the same mood as the stalactites, because it is gentle, small, and best noticed when the eyes have surrendered to darkness. Above a black underground stream, those lights may appear like stars reflected in deep water. Around them, the limestone continues its slower shining, pale where a lamp passes hidden again when the light moves away. In a cave, darkness is not the absence of detail. It is a covering that asks you to listen differently. You notice the water first, the spaced drops falling from ceiling to pool, from straw to stone, from hidden crack to hidden basin. You notice the coolness on your skin, the faint earthy scent of wet rock, and the way sound returns from the walls, softened and rounded. The darkness removes the far distance, but it gives back small nearness, and the cave becomes a place of close attention. You are not looking across a wide view, but into one bead of water gathering at a mineral tip. That bead contains a miniature version of the whole cave process, held in a clear, curved surface. It gathers slowly because water is moving through pathways above, guided by pressure, gravity, and the shape of the rock. It hangs because surface tension holds it for a moment, making a tiny lens that catches whatever faint light is present and turns it into a silver rim. It changes because the cave air touches it, and the dissolved chemistry shifts at the boundary between liquid and gas. Then it falls, and what remains behind is almost nothing, except that almost nothing has been repeated for a very long time. The limestone around Waitomo belongs to a karst landscape, a kind of terrain shaped by the dissolving of soluble rock, and karst often hides its greatest beauty beneath an ordinary surface. The hills may look gentle above, but below them are passages, chambers, shafts, underground rivers, and pockets of air where water has made room for darkness. This is not the hardness of stone winning over water, or water defeating stone, but a balance that has played out across immense spans of time. Limestone dissolves, caves open, ceilings drip, calcite returns, and the same mineral that was removed from one place is quietly rebuilt in another. The landscape breathes inward and outward through chemistry. As you drift deeper into the thought of the cave, the old seafloor origin of the limestone begins to feel present again. The calcium carbonate in the rock came from marine organisms that once lived in warm, shallow waters, building shells and skeletons from the chemistry of the sea. After they died, their remains settled, accumulated, compacted, and became stone, so the cave ceiling above you is made from the memory of countless small lives. Much later, rainwater entered that stone and began opening chambers through it, and still later, other water began decorating those chambers with the same material. The stalactite is ancient sea life dissolved and reassembled in darkness. There is a softness in that cycle, because the cave does not treat old things as finished. It lets them return in new forms. A shell becomes sediment, sediment becomes limestone, limestone becomes dissolved mineral becomes a droplet, and the droplet becomes a ring of calcite around a hanging tip. Layer by layer, the stalactite grows downward, as though the stone is remembering how to lengthen. Nothing in that sequence needs to be hurried to be complete, and nothing needs to be visible at every stage to be real. The unseen parts are carrying the visible parts into being. In the stillness, you can imagine the thin hollow inside a young soda straw, carrying water along its narrow length, drop after drop, while the outer wall thickens with a glimmer of calcite. The tube may be straight where the drip is steady, or slightly bent where airflow, surface irregularities, or changing water paths encourage growth to wander. Some formations twist or taper unevenly, not because they are broken, but because the cave environment is full of tiny variations. A small change in flow can become a curve, a mineral impurity can become a band of color, and a pause in dripping can become a faint boundary between layers. The cave writes its conditions into shape. The air inside the cave plays its own quiet part, even though it seems so still that it might be mistaken for nothing. Carbon dioxide levels, humidity, and airflow all influence how quickly calcite is deposited, because the droplet responds to the air it meets. In very humid air, water may evaporate slowly, and in slightly moving air, evaporation and degassing may shift the balance in another way. The cave does not need a breeze that you can feel for these small changes to matter over time. A formation can be shaped by conditions so subtle that they are almost invisible, yet persistent enough to leave a mineral signature. Water takes many routes through the limestone, and each route gives a stalactite its own pace. Some drips may be steady for long periods, while others become active only after heavy rain has moved through the ground above. Some carry more dissolved calcium carbonate, while others arrive more dilute, depending on how long the water traveled through the rock and how much carbon dioxide it gathered in the soil. The result is a ceiling full of individual histories, with one formation thick and mature, another newly hollow and fragile, and another paused in growth for reasons hidden inside the stone. Each one is a slow answer to a slightly different question. It is easy to stand beneath them and feel that they are hanging down from the darkness like the roots of the earth. They do not draw nourishment in the way living roots do, but they do connect the hidden cave to the weathered world above. Every drop that feeds them began somewhere beyond the ceiling, in rain and soil and open air, and every mineral layer records that connection without ever needing daylight. The cave is not separate from the surface. It is the surface continued inward, made cooler, dimmer, and slower. Above, rain may patter on grass, while below, a stalactite receives the softened echo of that rain hours, days, or longer afterward. The soundscape of the cave has very few elements, and that simplicity gives it a deep restfulness. There is the occasional drip, the faint movement of water in hidden channels, the quiet shift of your own breathing, and the soft return of those sounds from curved limestone walls. Nothing competes for attention, so the mind begins to settle into the same rhythm that the cave has always known. The spaces between drops can feel as important as the drops themselves, because they allow the silence to widen again. In that widening, the stalactites seem to become less like objects and more like the visible edges of time. If you could watch one stalactite without moving for longer than a lifetime, its growth would still seem almost motionless. You might see seasons alter the flow, wetter months bringing more frequent drops and drier months leaving the tip clear and still. You might see a thin ring of calcite grow at the end of a straw, or a roughened outer surface gather new layers where water has begun to flow down the outside. Yet even with patient watching, the change would be too slow for ordinary attention. The cave asks for another scale of seeing, one that trusts accumulation more than movement. On that scale, the smallest addition matters, because a stalactite is made from persistence rather than force. A fraction of a millimeter in a year can become a visible length over many centuries, just as a soft path in stone can become a chamber when water is given enough time. The cave reminds you that quiet processes are not weak simply because they are slow. They may be among the most powerful processes on Earth, not because they break suddenly, but because they continue without needing to be noticed. The shape above you is a calm proof of repetition. The Waitomo Caves hold many kinds of water, from droplets to underground streams, and each kind has its own way of shaping the limestone. Flowing water can enlarge passages, polish rock, and carry sediment through the dark, while dripping water can build the delicate formations that hang above and rise below. Seeping water may spread over walls and floors, leaving smooth calcite sheets that catch light like wet silk. Pool water may become rimmed with mineral edges, tracing stillness in pale outlines. Everywhere, water is not only passing through the cave, but also making and remaking it. The ceiling above you may show places where water has entered through joints and fractures, because limestone often breaks along natural lines that become pathways for rain. At first, such cracks may have been tiny, but water widened them by dissolving the rock along their edges, opening channels through which more water could move. This is one of the quiet feedbacks of karst. A small path allows water through, the water enlarges the path, and the enlarged path invites more water. In time, chambers form where openings connect and expand. Later, when conditions allow mineral deposition, those same roots may begin feeding stalactites. The old stone does not need to be perfectly smooth to become beautiful, and in fact, the cave's unevenness is part of its gentle character. Ridges, pockets, scallops, ledges, and hollows hold shadows differently, so the wall appears to shift as faint light moves across it. Some surfaces look like melted wax, where calcite has flowed in rounded layers, while others remain rougher, showing the limestone beneath the later mineral skin. The stalactites hang within this larger texture, not as separate ornaments, but as part of a continuous underground landscape. You are not looking at decorations in a room. You are inside the room that water made. There is a particular calm in knowing that most of the cave's work happens when nobody is watching. Rain falls at night, moves through soil, dissolves a little limestone, travels through a hidden fracture, and arrives at a ceiling in darkness. A droplet forms without witness, releases gas without sound, leaves calcite without ceremony, and falls into the deeper hush. Over and over, beyond the reach of ordinary attention, the cave continues. Its patience does not depend on being admired, which is part of why it feels so peaceful to imagine. When light does touch a stalactite, it often reveals the fine wetness along its tip, where a foaming drop gathers in clear, rounded brightness. The rest of the formation may remain matte and pale, with small ridges left by former flows of mineral-rich water. If the stalactite is older and thicker, its surface might show subtle bands, bulges, or tapering changes that reflect shifts in water supply through time. Some parts may have grown quickly by cave standards, while others rested their growth slowed or stopped when the water found another route. Even stillness in a cave can have a history. The floor below may hold broken fragments from long ago, where old formations fell or were carried by natural changes, but even these pieces settle back into the quiet of the cave. Calcite can continue to coat surfaces after they come to rest, softening edges over time and folding the broken thing into the ongoing mineral landscape. In that way, the cave does not sharply divide making from remaking. A fallen piece is not merely an ending. It can become part of another surface, another flowstone layer, another place where water pauses and leaves a trace. Everything remains within the slow conversation between water and limestone. You can feel the temperature become steady as you linger, cool but not harsh, the kind of coolness that belongs to sheltered stone and underground air. Caves often keep a more even temperature than the surface because the rock buffers daily changes and holds the interior close to the deeper average of the surrounding ground. This steadiness matters for the formations as well, because stalactite growth depends on a consistent interplay of water, air, and chemistry. Sudden drama is not required here. The cave's stability is part of its artistry. The word Waitomo carries the sense of water and a shaft or opening, and the name feels beautifully suited to a place where water disappears into darkness and returns as form. Beneath the hills, openings lead into chambers where streams move through blackness, and ceilings gather mineral points like sleeping chandeliers. The caves are not isolated from the wider landscape because the same rain that shines on leaves above can become a droplet hanging from limestone below. In this way, the place is both local and ancient, both specific and part of a much larger geological pattern. It is one expression of the way water learns stone. As you imagine yourself moving slowly through the cave, the path does not need to lead anywhere quickly, because the real destination is attention. You notice how the ceiling lowers in one place and rises in another, how the stalactites cluster where water has found reliable passages, and how open spaces feel larger when the light is low. You notice that the darkness is not uniform, because some areas hold a faint sheen of moisture, while others absorb light with a deep, velvety patience. You notice how the cave changes you, encouraging your thoughts to stretch out, to lengthen, to become less eager for edges. Even the mind begins to drip more slowly. A single stalactite may have begun with a rough spot on the ceiling, a tiny irregularity where a drop could gather again and again. That roughness became a point. The point became a rim. The rim became a narrow tube, and the tube became the beginning of a form that might outlast generations. The process is simple in outline, yet endlessly delicate in detail, because every droplet is influenced by the chemistry of the water, the texture of the rock, the humidity of the air, and the timing of rain above. In a world that often seems to value speed, the cave offers another kind of making. It says that slowness can be exact. The calcite, laid down by dripping water, is usually crystalline, and on very small scales, it forms with a structure that gives the stone its pale clarity. You may not see individual crystals from where you stand, but you can sense their presence in the way a formation catches light along a damp edge. The mineral is the same chemical family as limestone, yet it has returned from solution in a fresh arrangement, rebuilt by the conditions of the cave. This is why a stalactite can seem both old and new. It is made from ancient rock, but its surface may still be receiving today's water. Sometimes the drip slows until a formation is almost dormant, and the tip becomes dry, waiting through a pause that may last for years or longer. The cave does not interpret this as failure, because waiting is one of its natural states. Water may return when rainfall patterns change, when a fracture clears, when roots above shift the soil, or when unseen pathways open again. Then the tip may shine with moisture once more, and the long work may continue from where it left off. In the life of a cave, interruption can be just another layer in the mineral record. The glowworms, when they are present nearby, make the darkness feel inhabited by softness rather than emptiness. Their light is small and blue-green, held in the cave like stars caught close to the earth, and it does not disturb the stalactites, which continue their mineral work without response. Living light and stone growth share the same chamber, each following its own rhythm, one measured in nights and feeding, the other in droplets and centuries. The ecosystem depends on moisture, darkness, and the quiet movement of small organisms through the cave air. It is delicate, but not dramatic. It is simply life arranged around the conditions that the cave provides. In the deeper rooms, the limestone formations may seem to gather like a forest turned upside down, with pale, tapering shapes descending through the dimness. Some are slim enough to seem fragile, while others are broad and ridged, their surfaces shaped by water that has shifted from precise dripping to wandering flow. Curtains of calcite may hang in thin folds, translucent at their edges, and when light passes through them, they can glow with a warm, muted amber. These formations are related to stalactites, but their water moves differently, spreading along a slanted ceiling or wall instead of falling from a single point. The cave contains many ways of being slow. The more you listen, the more the dripping begins to feel like a kind of clock, though not one that divides time into sharp pieces. It is a clock that measures by intervals of moisture, by the swelling and release of droplets, by the almost invisible thickening of mineral edges. Human clocks are made to remind us of what is next, but the cave's clock seems to remind you that much of the world is already continuing without hurry. Each drop falls when it is heavy enough, not before. Each layer forms when the chemistry allows, not because anyone has asked it to. This is why stalactites feel restful to contemplate, because they are the result of countless small completions rather than one large event. A droplet completes its gathering, completes its exchange with the air, completes its fall, and leaves behind a nearly imperceptible mineral remainder. The formation does not need to know its final shape because every drop answers only the conditions of its own moment. Yet over time, those small answers become graceful, tapered, and complex. The cave suggests that patience does not require a plan visible from the beginning. As you continue inward, the surface world feels farther away, though it is still present in every drop. Grass, soil, roots, rain, and air have all entered the cave in dissolved and hidden forms, transformed by darkness into mineral growth. You might imagine a rainy afternoon above Waitomo, water slipping through the earth while the caves below receive it with no sense of weather's brightness or noise. The rain's surface sound is gone by the time it reaches the ceiling, but its chemistry remains. What was once falling from a cloud now hangs from stone. The ceiling seems to breathe in tiny points of moisture, as though the cave were exhaling water through its limestone skin. Some drops are clear and round, some cling longer to rough tips, and some fall so quietly that you notice only the small dark mark where they land. The stalactites that receive steady water may shine faintly at their ends, while older dry formations look softer and more matte. Their surfaces invite a kind of visual quiet, because they contain detail without demanding speed from the eye. You can look at one for a long time and still find another ridge, another tint, another trace of flow. There is no need to imagine the cave as separate from time, because it is full of time, held in a form that feels almost touchable. The stone remembers the ancient sea, The limestone remembers pressure and uplift. The passages remember dissolution, and the stalactites remember dripping water. The present moment is only the latest thin layer on a long mineral history, and even now, while you listen, more water may be moving through the rock above. Somewhere in the cave, a droplet is forming at the end of a straw. Somewhere, a ring of calcite is being left behind. The comfort of this place comes partly from its lack of hurry, and partly from its indifference, which is not coldness, but a spacious freedom from demand. The cave does not need you to understand it all at once, and it does not change its rhythm to match the quickness of thought. It offers darkness, cool air, stone, water, and the occasional living glimmer of glowworms. And it lets those things be enough. In that atmosphere, the mind can loosen its grip on surfaces and settle into something wider. You are allowed to be small here, and being small can feel peaceful. The slow formation of stalactites is not only a geological process, but a lesson in how beauty can gather from almost nothing. A trace of dissolved mineral, a pause at the ceiling, a release of carbon dioxide, and a droplet falling into the dark become the basis for a structure that may hang for thousands of years. The amount left behind each time is so slight that it seems impossible for it to matter until you remember that the cave has more patience than you do. It has rain after rain, season after season, century after century. It has the calm generosity of repetition, and as you keep moving through the Waitomo darkness, you may notice how the formations create their own quiet weather of stone overhead. Stalactites gather in clusters where water has been faithful to certain paths, and their tips seem to point downward like slow rain that never quite finishes falling. Between them, the ceiling shows shadowed hollows and pale mineral crusts, each one shaped by a slightly different movement of water through rock. The whole chamber becomes a suspended record of seepage, dripping, and deposition. It is not still because nothing happens. It is still because everything happens slowly. The floor accepts the falling drops with the same patience, and where mineral has accumulated below, stalagmites rise like rounded candles from the earth. They may be squat and broad, or tall and tapering, depending on the drip height, the splash pattern, and the mineral content of the water. When a drop falls from far above, it may scatter slightly, spreading calcite over a wider area, while a gentler drip may build a narrower mound. Over great lengths of time, the upward and downward forms may approach one another, not in urgency, but in a long mineral conversation. The space between them narrows by patience alone. If they meet, the joined formation becomes a column, and what was once a falling distance becomes a continuous bridge of calcite. A column can feel ancient because it visibly connects the ceiling to the floor, showing that the drip persisted long enough for two separate growths to become one body. Yet, even after joining, water may continue to coat the column, thickening it, smoothing it, changing it by slow degrees. The cave rarely ends a process cleanly, it simply lets one form become another. In that way, every finished shape remains unfinished. You may feel the cave's darkness becoming more familiar now, no longer something to look against, but something to look with. The eye rests on pale mineral surfaces, on damp points, on the faint sheen of calcite where water has passed recently. Shadows collect behind hanging formations, making them seem deeper and more numerous, while the quiet blue-green glow of living light may hover in another chamber like a distant night sky. The cave holds these contrasts gently, light and dark, life and stone, water and air. Nothing argues with anything else. The science behind the stalactite remains simple enough to carry softly in the mind, like a smooth stone held in the palm. Rainwater absorbs carbon dioxide from the air and soil, becomes mildly acidic, dissolves calcium carbonate from limestone, enters the cave through cracks, and then releases some carbon dioxide into the cave air. As that release changes the chemistry of the droplet, calcite precipitates, meaning the dissolved mineral returns to solid form. Drop after drop, this solid mineral remains where the water paused. Over time, a hanging shape appears, though it has really been appearing all along. Because the process depends on water, the land above matters in quiet and intimate ways. Soil depth, vegetation, rainfall, and the pathways through limestone all influence how much dissolved mineral arrives at a cave ceiling. A healthy surface landscape can help regulate the water that feeds the underground formations, while changes above may alter the flow below in ways that take time to notice. The cave is hidden, but it is not isolated. It listens chemically to the world above it. The stalactites themselves do not listen, of course, and yet their shapes are records of response. A steady drip may make a straight straw, while variable flow may thicken a formation into a lumpy taper with ridged sides. Water running along an outer surface may leave ribs, beads, or flowing sheets, and impurities may create bands of muted color inside the calcite. If you could cut through a formation, which you would not do here, you might see layers like the growth lines of a very slow mineral tree. The outside is peaceful, and the inside would be history. You remain beneath them, breathing cool air, while the cave continues its careful exchange between liquid and stone. A droplet gathers above you, clear and heavy, with a trace of dissolved limestone, and for a few seconds it is held between falling and remaining. Its curved surface reflects a faint fragment of light, then lengthens, narrows, releases, and disappears into the chamber below. Behind it, a film of calcite may remain on the tip, too thin to see, but real enough to join the layers already there. That is how the ceiling descends without moving. In the Waitomo Caves, this descent of stone happens beneath hills that still receive rain, wind, and daylight, though the formations themselves know only darkness. They are sheltered from the quick changes of weather, yet fed by weather's slow underground continuation. A storm above may eventually become a livelier dripping in the cave, while a dry spell may quiet the ceiling and leave the tips clear. The cave translates surface events into underground rhythms, smoothing them, slowing them, and giving them mineral form. It turns passing weather into lasting shape. And now, as the chamber seems to grow wider around you, the stalactites overhead feel less like separate formations and more like one gentle downward movement, repeated across the ceiling in thousands of patient variations. Some hang low enough to show their taper clearly, some remain small and newly formed, and some merge with curtains and flowstones that ripple over the limestone in pale folds. The cave is full of beginnings that look ancient, and ancient things that are still beginning. Every drop is both an ending and a start. Every mineral trace belongs to something larger than itself. In the quietest places, where the ceiling is high and the water falls less often, the stalactites can seem to hang in a kind of sleep, each one waiting for the next soft arrival from the stone above. Their stillness is not emptiness, because the cave is always holding moisture in its air, and the rock is always carrying hidden pathways within itself. Even when you cannot hear dripping, the conditions for dripping remain, gathered in the limestone, in the soil, in the rain that may already be moving downward. The cave's silence is full of preparation. You can imagine the water beginning far above, where the surface is green and open, and the daylight lies across the hills with a gentleness the cave will never directly see. Rain settles into the ground, slips around roots, and lingers in the soil, where it takes in carbon dioxide from the breathing of tiny organisms and the quiet decay of leaves. This is not a violent kind of acidity, but a mild and patient change, enough to let water speak chemically with limestone. Then the water continues downward, carrying a little more of the earth with every hidden step. The limestone receives this water through pores, joints, fractures, and old channels, and each passage has its own slow memory. Some routes may be short, letting water arrive quickly after rain, while others wind through the rock for longer, gathering more dissolved calcium carbonate before they reach the cave air. The ceiling is therefore not one simple surface, but the underside of an intricate unseen network, a map of tiny passages written in darkness. When a drop appears at the tip of a stalactite, it has already completed a journey you cannot watch. Its arrival is only the visible ending of a hidden descent. That hidden descent is part of what makes stalactites feel so quietly mysterious, because you see the final bead of water, but not the long preparation inside the stone. Above the ceiling, the droplet may have moved through limestone in a film so thin it had no separate shape, or gathered in a crack before finding the narrowest possible exit. It may have paused around grains of rock brushed against air pockets, or joined other trickles before becoming one shining drop. By the time it hangs in the cave, it carries the chemistry of all those small encounters. Then it gives a little of itself back to the air, The release of carbon dioxide is almost impossible to imagine visually, and yet it is central to the making of the form overhead. The droplet enters the cave with calcium carbonate held in solution, but as carbon dioxide escapes into the cave air, the water can no longer hold quite as much mineral. Calcite begins to precipitate, returning from invisibility into stone, and it gathers along the edge where the droplet clings. The amount is tiny, quieter than dust, smaller than a thought as it passes, but it remains. What falls away is water, and what stays behind is growth. When the drip point is steady, the calcite can form a narrow ring around the falling water, and the stalactite may lengthen into a straw so thin it seems almost drawn. The inside of that straw remains hollow while water passes down through it, touching the rim at the end before falling into the dark below. Such formations can be very delicate, because their walls are slender and their shape depends on a continuing flow through the same small channel. If the path stays open, the straw may grow longer and longer, a pale mineral thread lowered from the ceiling by time. If the path closes, the water changes its way. Once water begins to travel along the outside, the form thickens, and the slim straw becomes a broader stalactite, with ridges, beads, and soft irregularities. The change is not abrupt, because the cave does not often work in abrupt changes, but over time, the difference becomes visible. The smooth tube gains texture, the taper widens, and layers build over earlier layers until the original hollow path may be hidden inside the mass. In this way, a simple beginning can become a complex shape without ever leaving its first point of attachment. The cave adds without erasing completely. Some stalactites grow almost straight downward, and others wander slightly, following small shifts in water flow, air movement, or the uneven texture of the ceiling. A change too small to notice in one season may become visible over centuries as a curve or gentle leaning of the form. Mineral does not fall evenly everywhere because each droplet chooses the lowest edge, the wettest path, or the roughest place where surface tension can hold it. The result is a natural asymmetry that feels more soothing than perfect symmetry would. The cave's beauty comes from responsiveness, not design. In Waitomo, the limestone chambers often carry the softness of water in their shapes, with rounded walls and hidden streamways that suggest long dissolving patience. The passages were not dug by one flood or opened by a single event, but expanded by water moving through soluble rock over immense stretches of time. As water dissolved limestone from cracks and bedding planes, small openings became larger cavities, and some cavities eventually connected into chambers. Later, when parts of the cave had airspace above flowing water, mineral-rich drips began to rebuild stone in new hanging forms. The cave was hollowed by water and then ornamented by water. There is a quiet balance in that, because dissolution and deposition are opposite movements within the same landscape. In one place, water takes calcium carbonate away from limestone, and in another place, the same water returns calcium carbonate as calcite. The cave is therefore both loss and making, emptiness and growth, hollow and formation, all held together beneath the hills. A chamber can exist because stone was removed, while its ceiling becomes beautiful because stone is being returned. Nothing is wasted in the deeper patience of geology. The walls beside you may show flowstone, where water has not fallen cleanly from a point, but has moved in sheets over sloping rock. Flowstone can look like frozen cascades, though the word frozen does not quite fit, because the shape is not water stopped suddenly, but mineral placed slowly along a path. It folds over surfaces in rounded terraces, soft bulges and ripples that resemble fabric or wax, each line marking where a film of water carried calcite and left it behind. These features belong to the same family of cave deposits as stalactites, though their movement is broader and more spread out. They remind you that dripping is only one way for water to write. Where water seeps along a slanted ceiling, thin curtains of calcite may form, and their edges can glow warmly when touched by light. They hang like mineral cloth, sometimes translucent near the rim, with bands of cream, amber, brown or pale grey showing changes in impurities and flow. A curtain grows as water traces the same sloping line again and again, leaving calcite along its path until the sheet lengthens downward. It is a stalactite shaped by sideways motion before gravity takes over. Even in hanging forms, water remembers the direction it came from. The cave's color is subtle because it belongs to mineral, moisture, and low illumination, not to the bright surfaces of the world above. Calcite may be white where it is pure, honeyed where organic traces or iron oxides have tinted it, and softly brown where soil chemistry has entered the drip water. These colors do not behave like surface colors in open sunlight, but appear gradually, warming and fading as your eyes adjust to the dimness. A stalactite may look pale from afar, then reveal gentle bands when you stand beneath it. The closer attention becomes, the more quietly varied the darkness is. You may notice that the cave air has a particular weight, cool and damp, but not heavy in a troubling way. It rests against the skin with the steadiness of an enclosed place, and it carries the scent of mineral water and earth softened by time. This humid air helps preserve the wet sheen on active formations, slowing evaporation and allowing droplets to gather without vanishing too quickly. It also supports the subtle chemistry that decides when calcite will leave solution. Even the air participates in the growth of stone. The cave environment must remain stable for stalactites to continue growing in their old rhythm. Too much disturbance in airflow, humidity, or carbon dioxide can alter the delicate balance at the drip point, and even small changes may matter over long periods. In a living cave, the formations are not simply objects to be viewed, but processes still in progress, responsive to the breath of the place around them. This makes their stillness feel more alive, in a geological sense, because they are sensitive without moving. They belong to conditions as much as to stone. As you imagine walking slowly along a passage, the roof may dip lower in places where the stalactites feel close enough to become part of your breathing. You do not need to touch them, because their presence is clear from the cool space they occupy and the fine drops that gather at their tips. Their surfaces are often more fragile than they appear, and the oils from a hand can interrupt mineral growth by changing how water clings. So the best way to meet them is simply to look, to let them remain undisturbed, and to understand that distance can be a form of care. The cave keeps growing when it is left to its own quiet work. A drop falls somewhere beyond your sight, and the sound arrives rounded by the chamber, softened by the stone and the darkness. It does not echo sharply, because the cave absorbs as much as it returns, and every sound seems to come from farther away than it truly is. Another drop answers after a long space, not in rhythm exactly, but in relation, like a conversation between hidden points of water. You begin to hear the cave as a wide and patient room where time is expressed in intervals. The silence after each drop feels deeper because something has moved through it. The stalactites overhead are not all the same age, and this difference gives the ceiling a layered presence. Some may have begun growing in relatively recent centuries, while others may be far older, their length and thickness shaped by a long continuity of drip water. Age cannot be read from size alone, because growth rates vary widely depending on water supply, chemistry, and cave conditions. A small formation may be old and slow, while a larger one may have grown under more generous dripping. The cave does not offer simple measurements at a glance, only clues held in mineral form. Scientists who study cave deposits sometimes use stalagmites and stalactites as records of past climate, because their layers can preserve signals from the water that formed them. The chemistry of calcite may reflect rainfall, vegetation, temperature, and atmospheric conditions from the time each layer was deposited. In this way, a formation is not only a beautiful hanging shape, but a quiet archive of the surface world above. Its layers can hold traces of wetter periods, drier periods, and subtle shifts in the environment that fed the cave. The darkness keeps records without making them obvious. Yet even without instruments, the emotional truth of the formation remains simple and calming. A stalactite tells you that small things can accumulate without noise, that a drop can matter, and that the world contains processes that do not depend on attention. It grows whether anyone stands beneath it or not, and it keeps the record of rain in a language older than human speech. There is comfort in that kind of ongoingness. The cave continues beyond the edges of thought. The Waitomo glowworms add another layer of quiet life to this underground ecosystem, though they follow a rhythm very different from the minerals. They hang fine, sticky threads in the darkness and glow to draw tiny flying insects toward them, creating a soft living ceiling of blue-green points where conditions are moist and sheltered. Their light is chemical, produced within their bodies, and it seems especially gentle because it appears only in darkness. Near stalactites, the glow can make the mineral forms feel like silhouettes against a small inner sky. Stone and life share the dark without needing to become the same thing. The insects that support glowworms may depend on streams and organic material entering the cave, reminding you that even the deepest stillness is connected to movement. Leaves, fine debris, and small living things may travel through entrances, watercourses, and air spaces, bringing energy from the surface into the cave ecosystem. The mineral landscape feels ancient and quiet, while the living community is more temporary, renewed through cycles of feeding, growth, and change. Both belong to Waitomo's hidden world. One works in weeks and months, while the other works in centuries and beyond. The stalactites do not glow by themselves, yet they can seem luminous when faint light touches their wet edges, especially where a droplet catches and holds a small reflection. A single bead at the tip can briefly appear brighter than the stone around it, like a tiny lantern made from water. Then it falls, and the light goes with it, leaving the formation pale and quiet again. This gentle appearing and disappearing suits the cave better than any constant brightness would. In Waitomo, the eye learns to value what is faint. As you pass deeper into the thought of the cave, it becomes easier to imagine the chambers before people entered them, when only water, stone, darkness, and cave life kept company there. The stalactites were already forming, drip by drip, without names, without lamps, without pathways, and without anyone comparing one shape to another. The cave did not wait to become meaningful because its meaning was already held in its processes. Rain dissolved stone, water entered air, calcite gathered, and life adapted to the damp underground world. Human wonder arrived later, but the cave's patience was already complete. The limestone ceiling may seem solid, but it is really a place of exchange, where water from above enters the open air below and leaves a record of that passage. Every stalactite marks a point where the hidden network has touched the visible chamber. Some points are active, shining with moisture, while others are quiet, perhaps abandoned by water that has shifted to another route. Over time, the ceiling becomes a map of former and present pathways. It shows where water has been faithful and where it has moved on. This faithfulness of water is not conscious, of course, but it feels tender when you look at the result, because the shape depends on returning. The drop returns to the same point often enough that mineral can gather there, returns through the same path often enough that a tube can lengthen, returns through seasons and years until the rock itself seems to have reached downward. A stalactite is a memory of repetition made visible. It is what happens when the same quiet action is allowed to continue. The cave is full of such permissions. Sometimes the drip point shifts slightly, and new growth appears on one side of an older formation, creating an uneven surface that shows the cave's adjustment. Water may find a new edge, follow a new ridge, or spread in a thin film around a blocked channel. The stalactite adapts by receiving mineral where the water now travels, thickening in response to the changed path. Its form becomes a record of both constancy and variation. Nothing in the cave is perfectly fixed, even when it appears still. On the floor, the receiving point below may darken with moisture, and if calcite builds there long enough, a small mound begins to rise with a rounded patience. A stalagmite's top is often softer and less pointed than the stalactite above, because falling drops splash, spread, and deposit mineral across a wider surface. The distance of the fall, the rate of dripping, and the mineral content of the water all influence the shape that grows upward. Sometimes the stalagmite seems almost directly beneath its ceiling companion, and sometimes it spreads more broadly, as if the water has scattered its memory. The floor answers in its own way. The idea of a column forming between ceiling and floor can feel almost like the cave taking a long breath and holding it forever. From above, mineral descends. From below, mineral rises. And eventually the two meet, joining the chamber's upper and lower worlds. This meeting may take so long that many surface landscapes change while it is happening, and still the column grows only by the same small drips. Once joined, it may continue thickening as water runs along its surface. The connection is not an endpoint, but another surface for time to use. The cave's darkness helps preserve a sense of depth, because without distant views, you measure space by sound, moisture, and the nearness of stone. A high ceiling may be felt through the long fall of drops, while a narrow passage may be felt through the closeness of cool limestone at your sides. Stalactites help define this hidden architecture, pointing downward from roof lines, marking shelves and showing where water has entered through the rock above. They make the invisible ceiling active. They show that the cave is not merely a hollow, but a continuing process. Even the smallest active drip can become a point of attention in the dark, because it is one of the few moving things in an otherwise motionless scene. You watch the bead swell, hold, and release, and the mind seems to soften around that rhythm. There is no need to anticipate the exact moment it will fall, because waiting is part of the calm. The drop falls when it has gathered enough weight to overcome its hold on the stone. Then another begins, almost invisibly. This little cycle echoes the larger cycle of the cave, where rain becomes groundwater becomes drip water becomes calcite, and calcite becomes form. The sequence is both scientific and soothing, because each stage follows naturally from the one before it. There is no leap, no sharp transformation, only gradual changes in chemistry, pressure, contact, and time. The cave is a place where transformation moves slowly enough for the mind to rest beside it. You can follow the process without being hurried by it. Above Waitomo, the land's surface may be bright with cloud-filtered light, and the grass may bend under a passing breeze. Below, those surface movements arrive only as softened consequences, translated into seepage, temperature, and the amount of water moving through limestone. The cave receives the world indirectly, and perhaps that is part of its peace. It does not hold the noise of weather, only the afterlife of weather, the water that has passed through soil and stone. By the time the rain becomes a cave drop, it has forgotten how to fall quickly. The rock itself has an older origin than the dripping formations, and that older story gives the cave a deep foundation. Long before these chambers opened, the material that became limestone accumulated under ancient seas, built from the remains of marine organisms that took calcium carbonate from seawater. Their shells and skeletal fragments settled in layers, were buried, compacted, cemented, and eventually lifted into land through geological change. In Waitomo, the cave forms within this once marine stone, so every stalactite carries the chemistry of an ancient ocean reorganized by rain. Sea, stone, water, and cave are joined in one long sentence. To think of stalactites this way is to feel the deep continuity of Earth, where material moves from life to rock, from rock to water, and from water back to crystalline form. The cave does not separate biology from geology as sharply as words sometimes do, because the limestone itself came from life, and the formations come from limestone. Even the glowworms, shining in the darkness, belong to a web of moisture and organic movement that depends on the cave's physical shape. Everything here is connected, though not loudly. The connections are quiet enough to sleep beside. The drip water may be clear, but it is chemically rich, carrying dissolved ions in a balance shaped by soil, stone, and air. Calcium and bicarbonate travel together through the limestone, held in solution while the water remains under the right conditions. When the water reaches the cave, changes in carbon dioxide and evaporation encourage calcium carbonate to return as calcite. This is precipitation in the mineral sense, a forming of solid from liquid, not rain from sky. The cave has its own kind of weather, and its weather makes stone. The stalactite's growth rate can vary widely, and the cave does not promise a single measure for all formations. Some may add mineral very slowly, taking centuries for a small length, while others in favorable conditions may grow more quickly by cave standards. Temperature, carbon dioxide, saturation, drip frequency, and water chemistry all influence the pace, along with the shape of the flow path. Because so many factors matter, each stalactite is an individual record of its own place. Its length is not merely age, but circumstance. This individuality gives the cave ceiling a gentle variety, even when all the formations arise from the same general process. One slender straw may be nearly transparent at its rim, while another nearby formation may be thick, ribbed, and honey-colored. A cluster may show many active tips, each with its own bead of water, while another area may look dry and ancient, its formations resting in a pause. Together, they create a landscape of downward gestures. The cave ceiling becomes a slow rain made solid. You can sense why the place feels appropriate for sleep, because the deepest lessons here arrive without needing effort. The cave tells you that darkness can be sheltering, that slowness can be creative, and that a small repeated action can shape stone. It shows that the unseen is not necessarily empty, because above every droplet there is a hidden journey through limestone. It offers a world where nothing needs to hurry in order to become complete. Your thoughts can settle into that same permission. The cool air, the mineral scent, and the quiet sound of drops begin to blend into one atmosphere. You are not separate from the cave in this imagining, because your breath moves gently in the same damp air, and your attention follows the same downward direction as the water. The formations hang above like old, patient notes, in a song too slow for ordinary hearing. Each one has been shaped by contact, release, and return. Each one is a downward memory of rain. In some chambers, water has carved the space more dramatically in the past, but the present mood is still one of softness. Underground streams may have once carried more force through certain passages, enlarging them and leaving scalloped marks on the rock where currents shaped the walls. Now in quieter air-filled sections, dripping and seeping may dominate the visible process, adding rather than removing, placing mineral where water pauses. The cave carries both histories at once. It was opened by moving water and adorned by lingering water. The scallops in limestone walls, when present, can reveal the direction and speed of ancient flow, though they now rest in darkness like faint ripples held in stone. These marks belong to water's dissolving phase, when passages were being shaped by streams moving through the rock. Stalactites belong more to the air-filled phase, when dissolved mineral could be deposited after water entered the chamber. Together they show that a cave is not made by one process alone. It is a sequence of environments, each leaving its own trace. A chamber that now feels still may once have held water differently, perhaps filled more fully, drained more deeply, or connected to other passages in changing ways over time. As the water table shifted and openings evolved, spaces that were once submerged became air-filled, allowing stalactites to begin. This matters because stalactites cannot grow underwater in the same way. They need that meeting of dripping water and cave air. The presence of a stalactite therefore tells you something about the chamber's history. It says that air, water, and limestone have met here for a long while. The first tiny ring of calcite at a drip point might seem insignificant, but it begins the geometry of growth. As mineral gathers around the edge of the droplet, it creates a small raised rim, and that rim helps guide later water to the same place. The formation shapes the flow, and the flow shapes the formation, creating a quiet feedback between water and mineral. Over time, this can produce the thin hollow straw, the thickened taper, or the irregular hanging form. The cave grows by remembering its own surfaces. This feedback is one reason formations can become so graceful without any directing hand, because physical laws can make beauty when time is long enough. Gravity draws water downward. Surface tension holds droplets in rounded shapes. Chemistry leaves calcite behind, and the uneven rock provides beginnings. None of these forces intends an ornament, yet together they make delicate, balanced forms that seem almost intentional in their poise. The cave is not designing, its quiet order emerges from repetition. The thought of this can be deeply restful, because it suggests that complexity does not always require noise. A stalactite can become intricate through small causes, acting again and again, without urgency, without conflict, without any sudden command. Its surface records shifts in flow and chemistry, but the record remains gentle, folded into mineral bands and tapering shapes. Even change appears calm when stretched across enough time. The cave teaches change at a sleeping pace. You may feel yourself slowing with it, as though your attention were a droplet moving through stone. First, it passes through the surface thoughts, then through deeper layers, then into a darker chamber where only the essential sounds remain. There is the quiet of the cave, the coolness of the air, the pale hanging forms, and the repeated arrival of water from above. Everything else can loosen for a while. The cave is large enough to hold what you set down. The stalactites continue overhead, some young and narrow, some older and rounded, all of them formed from the same patient exchange. Their tips point downward not with insistence, but with gravity's calm certainty, following the path every droplet has taken before letting go. The ceiling seems to lower itself by mineral increments, though so slowly that no single moment reveals the descent. You can stand beneath this downward growth and feel the gentleness of time made visible. It is time not as pressure, but as presence. When the water falls, it may land in a pool, on stone, or on the top of a growing stalagmite, and each landing creates its own sound. A pool gives a soft note, rounded and brief, while stone gives a lighter tap that fades quickly into the surrounding dark. If the drop lands on damp calcite, the sound may be almost too small to hear, more a change in silence than a sound itself. These differences make the cave's quiet feel textured. It is not a blank hush, but a listening hush. The floor beneath older formations may be uneven with mineral deposits, sediment, and the slow record of past dripping, all resting under the cave's cool air. Fine particles can be carried in by water and left behind when flows slow, building soft deposits that contrast with the hard calcite. In places, the floor may show the rounded rise of stalagmites, the spread of flowstone, or the subtle marks of water that once moved differently through the chamber. The cave floor receives everything that falls from above. It is the other half of the ceiling story, and still the main motion remains downward, from cloud to soil, from soil to limestone, from limestone to ceiling, from ceiling to darkness. The path is not straight, yet the direction is gentle and persistent, always following gravity through hidden openings. Every stalactite is part of that descent, a place where downward motion briefly becomes solid before the water continues. You can imagine the whole Waitomo landscape breathing this way after rain, the hills slowly releasing water into their underground rooms. Beneath the grass, the cave listens in drops. The thought of rain above the cave can be soothing, because rain is already a kind of slow music before it ever reaches the limestone. It falls on leaves, runs along stems, darkens soil, enters roots and pores, then moves out of sight into the hidden architecture below. By the time it reaches a stalactite, its surface rhythm has been transformed into a deeper, more spacious timing. The quick patter of rain becomes the occasional cave drop. The wide weather becomes a single bead. That bead, trembling at the end of calcite, is a small meeting between the present moment and the cave's long past. It contains water that fell recently, mineral from ancient limestone, carbon from soil breath, and the immediate conditions of cave air. When it releases, it leaves a trace of old sea stone at the ceiling and carries the rest downward into darkness. There is a whole landscape in that one motion. The cave makes simplicity from great complexity. If you look along a row of stalactites, you may see how some are aligned with cracks in the ceiling, revealing the hidden structure of the rock. Water follows these weaknesses because fractures provide easier routes than solid limestone. Over time, such routes can become reliable drip lines, and reliable drip lines can grow formations that mark the ceiling like pale handwriting. The pattern above you is therefore not random, even if it feels organic and free. It is guided by the rock's inner architecture. This architecture was shaped by stresses, bedding, uplift, dissolution, and the long history of limestone becoming land, then cave, then ornamented chamber. The stalactites are only the most visible and delicate expression of forces that began far earlier. They depend on the ancient deposition of carbonate material, the later fracturing and lifting of the rock, the movement of groundwater, and the opening of spaces where air could enter. Each hanging form is small compared with that history, yet it contains the whole sequence in miniature. A drop at the tip is connected to the making of hills. There is peace in tracing these connections slowly, because the mind can follow them without being startled, moving from rain to soil to rock, to cave to calcite. Every stage has its own quietness, and none of them needs to be separated sharply from the others. The surface feeds the underground reshapes the surface, and water passes between them like a patient messenger. The stalactite is one sentence in that correspondence. It hangs where the message has been repeated often enough to become stone. As the chamber deepens around you, the glow of any lamp would be gentle and restrained, touching only part of the stone before fading into shadow. A stalactite in that light may show a wet tip, a pale, ribbed body, and a darker line where mineral impurities have gathered along a former path of flow. Beyond it, other forms remain partly hidden, suggested by outlines rather than fully revealed. This partial seeing belongs to the cave's mood. You never need the whole chamber at once. The darkness allows each detail to arrive slowly, and this slow arrival helps the mind enter the same pace as the geology. First, you see the larger hanging forms, then the smaller straws between them, then the beads of water, then the faint bands in calcite, then the black spaces behind. The cave does not overwhelm you with brightness. It lets perception deepen gradually. In that way, looking becomes a descent of its own. You sink through layers of noticing. The stalactites may appear motionless, but at their active tips the boundary between water and mineral is always delicate. A droplet hangs there in a balance of gravity and surface tension, while dissolved calcium carbonate waits at the edge of returning to solid form. Carbon dioxide moves from the liquid into the cave air, and the water's chemistry shifts enough for calcite to gather. Then the drop falls, and the next one begins the same quiet work. The process is repetitive, but not mechanical in a harsh way. It is more like breathing, though slower than breath, and perhaps that is why it feels so restful. The cave receives water, releases gas, leaves mineral, and lets the remaining drop descend. It does this again and again, without strain, without haste, without needing to complete a shape within any particular span. The stalactite grows because conditions return. The cave rests because nothing is forced. In the hidden spaces above the ceiling, water may sometimes take a new path, and an old stalactite may become inactive while another point begins to shine. This means the cave ceiling changes its active centers over time, like a night sky where some stars fade and others appear. The dry formation remains as a record of former flow, while the wet point nearby begins its own mineral history. There is no waste in this shifting, because the old shape still belongs to the cave. It becomes part of the chamber's memory. A dry stalactite can be just as beautiful as an active one, because its stillness shows a different kind of time. Without the wet gleam at its tip, its surface may appear softer, dustier, or more matte, with old ridges preserved under the cool air. It may have grown for centuries or longer, before its water supply changed, and now it waits, not necessarily finished, but quiet. The cave does not always distinguish between growing and resting as sharply as people do. Rest is part of the process. The living things of the cave also know cycles of activity and rest, though their rhythms are much quicker than those of stone. Glowworm larvae feed, glow, grow, and eventually change form, while small insects move through damp air and near underground streams. Microorganisms may live on rock surfaces, in sediments, or in water films, participating in subtle cave ecologies that are easy to overlook. These forms of life do not disturb the mineral quiet. They add finer threads to it. The cave is not empty, even when it feels profoundly still. Moisture is the shared condition that allows much of this hidden world to continue, from mineral deposition to the soft glimmer of living light. Without water, the stalactites would stop growing, streams would quiet, humidity would fall, and the ecosystem would change. Water is therefore not only a sculptor, but a connector, carrying chemistry, energy, and continuity through the cave. It links the hills above to the darkness below. It links ancient limestone to present rain. The deeper you imagine yourself moving through Waitomo's limestone passages, the more the cave seems to be made of thresholds. There is the threshold between surface and underground, between water and air, between dissolved mineral and solid calcite, between darkness and the smallest visible light. Stalactites hang exactly at one of those thresholds, where hidden water becomes visible for a moment before falling away. They are boundary forms, suspended at the meeting of conditions. They make the invisible transition tangible. This is perhaps why they feel so quietly sacred, though no dramatic feeling is needed. They ask for lowered voices, not because they are fragile in mood, but because their timescale naturally softens the mind. A place that takes centuries to lengthen a mineral taper does not invite hurry. It invites you to breathe more slowly, to look without grasping, and to let the darkness hold the edges of the room. In that patience, the cave becomes restful. The surface world may be full of changing weather, but here the temperature remains even, the light remains low, and the sound remains mostly water. The sameness is not dull, because within it there are countless small variations, each one gentle enough not to disturb the overall calm. One drop falls sooner, another later. One formation shines, another rests. One wall gleams with flowstone, another absorbs the light. The cave's variety is slow and quiet. It never demands attention, but it rewards it. You can imagine lying in bed while thinking of this underground place, and the thought itself may begin to feel like a descent. The ceiling above you becomes the limestone roof of the cave, not pressing down but sheltering you with its old mineral patience. The room around you becomes cooler and darker in the mind, softened by the imagined sound of droplets falling far apart. Each breath is like a small movement through still air. Each exhale settles lower. The stalactites continue forming whether you watch them or not, and that independence can be deeply comforting. The world contains quiet work beyond worry, beyond planning, beyond the surface rush of hours. Somewhere beneath green hills, a droplet forms, hangs, changes, and falls, leaving behind a trace of calcite so small it almost disappears into meaninglessness. But it does not disappear. It joins the others. Over many years, those traces become a pale downward line, and over many more, the line becomes a formation with weight, texture, and presence. It may hang above a path, above a pool, above a dark recess, or above the beginning of a stalagmite rising slowly in answer. Its shape may be noticed by visitors, studied by scientists, or simply left alone in the dark for long intervals. None of that changes the basic fact of its making. It is water, limestone, air, and time. The cave teaches through this repetition, but it does not teach with sharpness or command. It offers an example rather than an instruction, showing how quiet conditions can produce something enduring through countless small acts. The lesson is not that everything must be slow, but that slowness has its own deep intelligence. Some things can only be made when urgency falls away. A stalactite is one of those things. And as your attention moves farther along the passage, the formations overhead seem to recede into darker layers, one behind another, their tips fading into shadow. The nearest ones show beads of water and pale calcite, while the farther ones become suggestions of downward shape, soft points in the dim cave air. Beyond them, the chamber continues in ways you do not need to fully see. It is enough to know that the darkness holds more stone, more water, more patient mineral growth. The unseen can remain unseen. There is a softness in letting the unseen remain, because caves are not meant to be understood all at once. Their passages branch, descend, narrow, widen, and turn back into darkness, and even a mapped cave keeps some of its feeling beyond the map. Stalactites are visible markers of hidden processes, but they do not reveal every detail of the water's route or the rock's past. They give just enough for wonder. The rest stays quiet. The drip from a stalactite may be part of a much larger water system, connected to underground streams that move through the limestone with a low, hidden continuity. Some water falls from ceilings, some seeps through walls, some gathers into channels and flows away into deeper passages. The cave is not a sealed room, but a breathing part of the karst landscape, through which water travels according to slope, permeability, and the openings it has made. This movement is usually gentle in the imagination, steady rather than forceful. It carries the cave's chemistry onward. A stream in darkness can polish stone and carry sediment, while the air above it may hold glowworms and hanging formations, bringing erosion, life, and deposition into one scene. The stream removes, the ceiling adds, the larvae glow, and the limestone walls hold everything in cool enclosure. Nothing needs to dominate the chamber. Each process occupies its place within the larger calm. The cave is a balance of slow activities. When you return your attention to one stalactite, the larger system becomes intimate again, gathered into a single drop. The bead swells at the tip, clear and round, and for a moment it contains the reflected world upside down in miniature. Then its lower curve lengthens, surface tension thins, and it falls away through the dark air, leaving the tip ready to gather another. The formation has grown by less than you can see. Still, the cave has received another increment of time. This is the heart of the slow formation of stalactites, not spectacle, but continuance. It is the steady return of water through limestone, the small chemical shift in cave air, and the almost invisible placing of calcite at the point of release. It is the surface world becoming underground architecture, and ancient marine stone becoming a hanging mineral taper beneath green hills. It is rain turned to memory. It is darkness shaped by drops, and the farther you drift into that understanding, the quieter the cave seems to become, though the dripping continues with the same unhurried patience. The mind no longer waits for something new to happen, because the happening is already here, repeated softly in every bead of water. The stalactites do not need to move quickly to hold your attention, and the darkness does not need to brighten to become beautiful. Everything important is subtle. Everything subtle is given time. At this depth of quiet, the cave seems less like a place you enter and more like a tempo you slowly accept. The stone asks nothing quickly from you, and the water does not hurry its small work above your head. Each stalactite hangs inside that tempo, shaped by pauses as much as by drops, by waiting as much as by mineral. You can feel the pace of the cave gathering around your thoughts, smoothing their edges until they move more like water through limestone. The darkness in Waitomo is not flat, because it holds many kinds of nearness inside it. Close formations show themselves as pale tapers and wet rims, while farther ones soften into shadow, becoming part of the chamber's deeper shape. The ceiling may seem to rise beyond the reach of ordinary seeing, then lower again where stalactites cluster along a fracture line. This makes the cave feel folded, layered, and intimate, even when the chamber itself is large. You are held within stone that reveals itself slowly. Some of the water that feeds these formations may have spent a long while moving through the rock before appearing as a single droplet. It may have entered after rain, passed through soil rich with carbon dioxide, and slipped into limestone where countless earlier waters had already widened the path. Along the way, it dissolved a little calcium carbonate, not by force, but by contact and patience. Then, at last, it found the underside of the cave roof. There it paused, clear and heavy, carrying stone invisibly within itself. When that droplet meets the cave air, it begins a change so subtle that it belongs more to chemistry than to sight. Carbon dioxide leaves the water, the balance shifts, and calcite becomes ready to form along the tiny edge where the droplet touches the ceiling. This edge is small, but over time it becomes the center of a hanging world, the first outline of a straw, a taper, a curtain, or a thicker formation. The droplet falls, but the edge remains altered. The next droplet arrives to a slightly changed place. That is how the cave remembers each drop, not with sound, but with surface. A minuscule deposit can make the next droplet cling differently, guiding water along a rim or down an outer wall. The formation and the water keep shaping one another, each one changing the conditions for the next moment. In ordinary life, such small differences would vanish from attention. In a cave, they are enough to build architecture. You can picture a young soda straw in the earliest part of its growth, pale and narrow, with a hollow center carrying water down through the inside. The droplet forms at the end of the tiny tube, and calcite gathers around the rim as each drop lets go. If the inner passage remains open, the straw lengthens without thickening much, descending like a fine mineral thread from the ceiling. It may grow in a nearly perfect line, or it may wander slightly where the water is guided by small irregularities. Even its straightness is a record of steadiness. If the hollow channel becomes blocked, the water begins to choose another path, often flowing over the outside of the straw in a thin, wet skin. The shape then grows broader, and the once delicate tube becomes covered by new layers that soften and thicken its outline. Ridges may appear where water follows repeated tracks, and small bulges may form where droplets linger before falling. The original tube may remain hidden inside, like the quiet beginning of a story now wrapped in later chapters. The stalactite carries its youth within it. Many formations in limestone caves grow from this kind of patient change, and their variety depends on how water arrives, how long it pauses, and how mineral returns to stone. A steady drip makes one form, a spreading seep makes another, and a sloping flow may create a curtain that hangs in mineral folds. All are shaped by gravity, chemistry, and the surfaces available to water. The cave does not need many ingredients to create many expressions. A few processes, repeated through time, become a landscape. In Waitomo, the presence of glowworms can make the mineral forms feel even more dreamlike, though the stone itself remains unchanged by their light. Their blue-green points may shine in damp chambers where insects move through the dark, creating a quiet living sky beneath the earth. Stalactites near that glow can appear as silhouettes, their tips hanging into a small constellation that seems both close and far away. The glow is biological and temporary, while the stone growth is mineral and immense in duration. Yet both belong to the same sheltered darkness. The glowworms depend on moisture, darkness, and the movement of small life through the cave, while the stalactites depend on water, limestone, and the steady exchange of gases. These are different processes, but they share a deep stillness of setting, because neither needs bright daylight to continue. The cave offers conditions, and life and mineral respond in their own ways. One response flickers softly, the other lengthens almost invisibly. The floor beneath the stalactites may be damp in places, lightly coated with calcite, where drops have landed and spread. Over time, a receiving point can grow upward as a stalagmite, broader and rounder than the formation above, because falling water splashes and deposits mineral across a wider area. This upward growth is slower than it appears in imagination, built from small repeated landings rather than one continuous rise. The stalagmite is not reaching with intention, yet it seems to answer. It is the floor's quiet reply to the ceiling. When a stalactite and stalagmite grow toward one another, the space between them becomes a visible measure of patience. For many years, there may be only darkness and falling water between the two forms, a gap crossed by each droplet in a brief silver motion. Then the gap becomes smaller by amounts too tiny to notice, until one day, under conditions no single observer could easily mark, the formations meet. After that, water may run along the joined column and continue adding mineral to its sides. The meeting is not an ending, but a change in the path. A column in a cave can feel especially restful because it seems to hold the ceiling and floor in one continuous gesture. It shows that the downward and upward records of dripping have become inseparable, and that the chamber has spent enough time in stillness for two slow shapes to join. The surface of the column may carry vertical ridges where water has continued to flow, softening the junction and thickening the mineral body. In low light, it may resemble a tree trunk made of pale rain. Yet it is not wood, not growth in the living sense, but water's memory made solid. The cave's air is part of every formation, although it seems quiet enough to disappear from thought. Its carbon dioxide content helps determine how easily the droplet releases gas and deposits calcite, and its humidity influences how slowly or quickly water evaporates from surfaces. Even small changes in airflow can alter where droplets cling, where mineral gathers, and how wet a formation remains. The invisible atmosphere around the stalactite is therefore not empty space. It is one of the materials of growth. This makes the cave feel like a whole body of conditions, rather than a collection of separate objects. The ceiling, water, air, floor, and surrounding limestone all contribute to what forms and how it forms. A stalactite is not simply hanging in the cave, it is produced by the cave, sustained by the relationships within the cave. To look at it gently is to look at a system slowed into grace. Nothing here stands entirely alone. The same water that deposits calcite in one place may continue downward and move through other passages, joining pools or streams that carry it into deeper routes. Along the way, it may lose more mineral, gain other dissolved substances, or leave behind traces on rock surfaces. Some of it may eventually emerge somewhere outside, returning to daylight after a hidden journey through stone. The cave is therefore not a sealed darkness, but part of a larger circulation. Water enters, changes, and moves on. On the walls, you may see places where water has once flowed in thin sheets, leaving smooth mineral coatings like pale melted wax. These flowstone surfaces can look soft in their curves, though they are made from calcite laid down layer by layer. They remind you that caves are shaped not only from above and below, but also sideways, along slopes, walls, ledges, and small shelves where water lingers. The flowing films deposit mineral wherever they slow, evaporate, or release carbon dioxide. The whole chamber becomes a page for water to write upon. There is a gentle humility in knowing that the most elaborate cave formations may begin from almost nothing. A rough spot on limestone, a repeated drip, a faint mineral ring, and enough undisturbed time can become a long hanging shape. No single drop makes the stalactite, yet each one participates. No single year explains the formation, yet every year has its place. The cave gathers smallness until smallness becomes visible. You may feel that same gathering as your attention settles, because calm often arrives by small increments rather than all at once. One breath slows, then another, and the mind follows the rhythm of imagined dripping deeper into stillness. The cave does not ask you to empty your thoughts, only to let them pass more slowly. Like water through limestone, they can move through narrow places without force. Like calcite at a drip point, quiet can accumulate. In some parts of Waitomo, the underground streams create a dark mirror that reflects glowworm lights and limestone edges, making the chamber feel suspended between water and stone. Above, stalactites descend from the ceiling. Below, their shapes may tremble in reflection, softened by ripples too faint to disturb the overall calm. A drop falling into the stream briefly opens a ring on the surface, and then the black water smooths itself again. The reflection returns, imperfect and peaceful. The cave accepts each disturbance and folds it back into quiet. Those streams also help sustain the cave ecosystem, carrying organic material and moisture through the darkness. Tiny insects may move near the water, and the glowworms use their soft light to draw them close, while the limestone formations continue their mineral work overhead. Life and geology overlap in the same chamber without needing to share the same pace. The living cycle is quick compared with stone, but in the hush of the cave, even life seems slowed. Everything appears to belong to the same dim breath. The ancient origin of the limestone gives Waitomo's formations an even longer depth than their own growth suggests. The calcium carbonate, now appearing as stalactite calcite, once belonged to marine sediments, to shells and skeletal fragments, to organisms that lived in seas long vanished from the surface landscape. Through burial, cementation, uplift, and weathering, that marine material became the rock around you. Through rainwater and cave air, a little of it becomes a hanging formation. The old sea returns as a drop-shaped memory in darkness. This cycle can be held gently in the mind without needing to name every technical part. Sea life became limestone, limestone became cave. Cave water became calcite, and calcite became the pale taper above you. The process is not circular in a perfect sense, but it is continuous, a long passing of material from one state into another. What was once under open water now hangs under earth. What was once living structure now becomes mineral stillness. The stalactite itself may hold layers that record subtle changes in the water feeding it, like a quiet archive sealed inside stone. Wetter periods might alter the drip rate, while changes in vegetation above might influence soil carbon dioxide and organic traces carried downward. Mineral impurities can tint layers, and variations in growth can create fine textures along the surface. To the eye, these records may appear as soft bands or ridges. To careful study, they can reveal histories of the landscape above. Still, the cave does not require analysis to be felt. Even without knowing the chemistry, the hanging forms speak through their patience, their cool surfaces, and their quiet presence in the dark. Science deepens the wonder, but it does not replace the simple calm of standing beneath a ceiling that has been slowly growing downward for ages. You can know that calcite precipitates as carbon dioxide leaves the water and still feel the mystery of a droplet falling. Understanding and wonder can rest side by side. The longer you remain in the imagined cave, the more the surface world seems to soften into a distant layer above. There may be wind moving over the hills, rain gathering in clouds, or evening light settling across fields, but below, the cave receives only what filters through stone. The movement is softened, slowed, and translated into seepage and drip. Weather becomes chemistry. Daylight becomes darkness fed by water. This translation is one of the cave's quiet miracles because it turns the quick events of the surface into enduring form. A passing shower may contribute only a little water, and that water may leave only a little calcite, yet the contribution remains as part of something larger. The moment does not vanish completely. It becomes a film, a ring, a layer, or a faint strengthening of the taper. In the cave, even passing weather can become permanent. Above a stalactite, the hidden path through limestone may shift over time as tiny cracks widen, clog, drain, or reconnect. These changes can alter the drip, creating pauses, renewed growth, or a new direction along the formation's side. The stalactite grows in response, not by deciding, but by receiving whatever water arrives. Its final shape is therefore an arrangement of accidents made orderly by time. Each irregularity is part of its calm truth. You might see one formation with a knobby surface, another with a smooth taper, and another with a thin straw extending from its tip. Each one has followed a different history of flow, saturation, and deposition, even while sharing the same limestone chamber. This is why cave ceilings feel so rich in detail, despite their limited palette of stone and water. Repetition does not erase individuality, it creates it slowly. The cave also contains pauses that cannot be easily seen, intervals when a formation may have stopped growing because the drip water changed course. Later, if the path returns, new mineral may begin to coat the older surface, creating a subtle boundary between periods of growth. These boundaries are part of the formation's life, if that word can be used gently for mineral becoming. The stalactite is not one continuous act, but many acts separated by quiet rests. Its stillness contains interruptions. Rest is everywhere in the cave, and that makes it feel especially suited to a sleeping mind. The stone rests, the darkness rests, the air rests, and even the water, though it continues moving, seems to move through restfulness. It pauses as a bead, releases as a drop, and settles into pools or floors with no urgency to continue its visible path. The entire chamber seems to breathe through long intervals. You can breathe with it. Sometimes the most soothing thing is to imagine the exact moment before a drop falls, when it is held at the stalactite's tip by surface tension. It lengthens slightly, carrying a small bright reflection in its curved underside, while gravity gathers patiently within it. There is no suddenness in the waiting, only a gradual becoming heavy enough. Then it lets go. The tip remains, and another bead slowly begins. In that repeating moment, the cave's timescale and the human body's timescale briefly overlap. You can watch a droplet form over seconds or minutes, while knowing that the stalactite it feeds grows over centuries. The small visible cycle gives the mind a doorway into the vast invisible one. You do not need to comprehend the whole age of the formation. You can simply follow one drop. The soft sound of falling water may move through the chamber like a distant note, touched by walls, floor, and ceiling, before fading back into silence. If many drips are active, their sounds may overlap without becoming busy, because the intervals remain uneven and spacious. One drop falls nearby, another farther away, and another perhaps into a pool beyond sight. Together they create no melody in the ordinary sense. They create an atmosphere of time. This atmosphere can make the cave feel older than any single measurement, because its age is not only in years, but in the way every surface has been shaped by duration. The ceiling holds stalactites, the walls hold dissolved curves, the floor holds deposits and sediments, and the streams hold channels made by movement. The entire place is evidence that time is not always sharp or rushing. Sometimes time is cool, damp, and mineral. Sometimes it hangs overhead in silence. The Waitomo landscape above, with its gentle hills and green surface, is part of that same evidence, because karst does not begin underground alone. Rainfall, soil chemistry, vegetation, and the slow dissolving of limestone create sinkholes, shafts, springs, and hidden routes that connect surface and depth. The caves are the inward expression of a landscape shaped by soluble rock. Their beauty is not separate from the hills, but folded beneath them. The surface and the cave are two sides of one slow system. You can imagine the hills after rain, the soil dark and fragrant, the water beginning its downward passage beneath grasses and roots. Below, in the cool limestone chambers, stalactites wait without knowing the weather, yet they receive its consequence. A drop appears because rain has moved, soil has breathed, limestone has dissolved, and gravity has guided the water through a path. The formation at the ceiling is the last visible step in a long, hidden chain. Its quietness contains a whole landscape. The chemistry may seem delicate, but its repetition is powerful in the most peaceful way. Carbon dioxide in soil water helps dissolve limestone, and carbon dioxide leaving cave water helps deposit calcite, so the same substance participates in both opening the cave and decorating it. This reversal is one of the elegant balances of karst. Water can hollow stone and build stone, depending on where it is and what conditions surround it. The cave is made from this gentle change of context. That balance gives the stalactites a sense of belonging to both absence and presence. The chamber exists because limestone was removed, while the formations exist because limestone was returned in another form. Emptiness and ornament are not opposites here. They are stages in the same long movement of mineral through water. The hollow makes room for the hanging stone. The hanging stone marks the hollow's continuing life. In low light, a stalactite's surface may show tiny ridges that look almost like ripples, each one formed by water moving over calcite. These ridges are not perfectly regular, because the drip may change with rainfall, air conditions, or the shape of the growing surface. Mineral gathers more in some places than others, and the stalactite becomes textured by these differences. To the eye, the texture feels like still water turned vertical. To the mind, it feels like time made touchable. You do not need to touch it. The thought is enough. The cave's formations are best left undisturbed, because their surfaces are active records, and even a small change can influence how water clings and deposits mineral. Looking becomes a gentle kind of participation, one that does not interrupt the process. The cave remains itself, and you remain a quiet observer. There is peace in that boundary. As the passage continues, the ceiling may open into a chamber where stalactites hang at many lengths, some like pale needles, some like tapered candles, and some like folded drapery. The differences make the chamber feel natural rather than arranged, because the forms follow water's opportunities rather than any imposed pattern. A fracture line might gather a cluster, while a smoother ceiling might hold only a few spaced drips. Shadows deepen between them, and the cave's upper world becomes a slow mineral canopy. It is a forest of water's decisions. In such a chamber, the sound of a single drop can feel both small and complete. It begins above, releases from a tip, passes through cool air, and lands somewhere below, briefly joining sound to darkness. The drop's journey is short compared with the water's hidden travel through limestone, but it is the part you can hear. It lets the cave speak in a language of intervals. Then the silence returns, not emptied, but renewed. The idea of renewal matters here, because every drop is new water arriving at an old place. The stalactite is ancient in its patience, but its active tip belongs to the present, receiving whatever the current conditions provide. Today's rain may become tomorrow's drip, or it may travel more slowly, arriving after the surface has changed. The formation holds old layers while accepting new ones. It is both memory and ongoing event. This ongoingness makes the cave feel alive in a geological way, though its life is not the quick pulse of animals or plants. It is a life of conditions, of water moving, gases exchanging, minerals dissolving and returning, and surfaces changing by increments. The glowworms add biological life, of course, with their faint light and delicate threads, but the stone itself also seems active once you understand its pace. The cave is not frozen. It is simply very slow. There is comfort in very slow things, because they loosen the grip of urgency. A stalactite does not ask to be finished by morning, and the limestone does not demand that rain become a formation all at once. The cave allows process to stretch across durations so long they become almost spacious. In that spaciousness, the mind can unclench. It can settle like a drop into darkness. The air around you remains cool, and the dampness on the stone gives the chamber a soft mineral scent. Nothing here is sharp, except perhaps the visual point of a young straw, and even that sharpness is softened by low light and silence. The formations do not glitter in a loud way, they gleam only where moisture catches the faintest illumination. Their beauty is reserved, slow, and patient. It meets you quietly. If you imagine the cave with all lights gone, only glowworms overhead in another chamber, the stalactites become unseen, but not absent. They continue hanging in darkness, their wet tips still gathering water, their mineral surfaces still waiting for the next trace. The cave does not depend on being visible to continue being itself. Its processes go on whether sight is present or not. Darkness is part of their natural condition. This can be reassuring in a strange and gentle way, because much of the world's care happens beyond attention. Roots grow unseen, groundwater moves unseen, minerals form unseen, and caves deepen their quiet histories without announcement. The surface world often notices only what becomes visible, but the cave reminds you that invisible work can be steady and real. A stalactite is hidden work made gradually visible. It is the patience of the unseen brought into form. The more you contemplate it, the more the droplet at the tip becomes a small world of balance. Gravity pulls it downward, surface tension holds it upward, chemistry changes within it, air surrounds it, and mineral waits at its edge. For a moment, all these conditions are gathered in one shining bead. Then the balance shifts, and the bead falls. The stalactite remains a little more complete than before. There is no need to know exactly how much mineral was left behind by that single drop. It may be too little for ordinary measurement, too subtle for the eye, but the cave does not require each addition to be large. It requires only that additions continue under the right conditions. A million small traces are not small anymore when they have been allowed to gather. The stalactite is an accumulation of nearly invisible certainties. In the wider chamber, other formations follow the same principle, each with its own rhythm and quiet history. One drip may be frequent, another rare. One waterpath rich in dissolved mineral, another less saturated. One tip active, another dry. This creates a ceiling where time has not flowed evenly, but has pooled, paused, and gathered differently from place to place. The cave is not uniform. It is patient complexity. The limestone itself may contain fossils or textures from its marine origin, though in the dimness these details are often hidden beneath later mineral deposits. Still, the thought of them adds a deeper layer to the scene, because the cave's walls were once sediments beneath water, open to the sky. The stone around you is not just rock in the abstract, but compressed biological history lifted into land and hollowed by rain. The stalactites are newer than the limestone, yet they are made from it. They are the cave's way of reworking its own ancient body. This reworking does not erase the past, but carries it forward into another shape. The marine organisms that contributed calcium carbonate to the limestone are long gone, yet their material persists in the chamber, in the walls, in the ceiling, and in the hanging mineral forms. Rainwater becomes the messenger between these ages, dissolving old carbonate and placing it anew. The process is quiet enough to feel like sleep. It is also vast enough to feel like awe. A cave like Waitomo offers both intimacy and immensity at once, because you can focus on one droplet while knowing it belongs to geological time. The single bead is close, clear, and simple, but its source extends through soil, rock, ancient sea, and the slow shaping of karst. This makes attention feel deep rather than busy. You are not moving quickly from one thing to another. You are sinking into one thing until it opens. The stalactite opens into water chemistry. The chemistry opens into limestone. The limestone opens into old seas, and the old seas open to the deep continuity of earth. Yet all of that can remain quiet, because the cave holds it without display. There are no sharp transitions, only layers of understanding settling gently over one another. The more you know, the softer the wonder becomes. It does not need to rise in volume. As you drift onward in thought, The path through the cave may curve beside a dark pool where the ceiling lowers and the drops fall more clearly. The pool receives them with a soft sound, and the surface carries small rings outward until they fade against stone edges. Above, stalactites hang in the reflected darkness, doubled briefly in the water before each ripple changes them. The real formations remain still, while their reflections breathe. It is another kind of slow movement. Pools in caves can also deposit calcite around their edges, forming delicate rims or terraces where water chemistry encourages mineral to settle. These features grow from stillness, from water resting long enough to give back some of what it carries. They are related to the stalactites overhead through the same mineral exchange, though their shapes belong to horizontal surfaces rather than falling drops. The cave does not confine calcite to one direction. It lets mineral gather wherever conditions invite it. The whole cave can therefore be understood as a landscape of invitations. A ceiling point invites a droplet invites a ring invites a straw invites thicker growth when water changes its path. A wall invites flowstone, a pool invites rims, and a floor beneath falling drops invites stalagmites. None of these invitations are spoken. They are built into the meeting of water, air, stone, and time. You can rest in that idea because it is gentle and complete enough for the mind to settle around it. The cave is not forcing beauty into being. It is allowing beauty to emerge from repeated conditions. The formations are not hurried achievements, but consequences of continuity. They are what happens when the world is left to work at its own natural pace. In this darkness, that pace feels kind. A faint glimmer may move across a wet stalactite tip as you imagine passing it, and for a moment, the drop there looks almost alive. It swells, holds, and releases, while the mineral edge remains behind with a trace of brightness. The next drop has already begun as a film of water, somewhere above, sliding through a path too narrow to see. The cave's work is not divided into neat beginnings and endings. One drop falls while another is already becoming. That overlap is part of the reason the process feels continuous rather than repetitive in a mechanical way. Each droplet is separate, but the flow that produces them is connected, shaped by rainfall, soil, limestone, and underground roots. A long dry period may stretch the intervals, while wetter conditions may bring a more frequent dripping. The stalactite receives these changes and stores them in form. Its quiet body is made from variability held inside continuity. In sleep, too, there is often a gentle movement between awareness and dreaming, between one thought and the next. The cave offers an image for that movement, because water passes from surface to depth without a sharp border. It seeps, gathers, releases, and settles, just as a tired mind can seep away from the bright surface of the day. The stalactites hang like reminders that descent can be natural and safe in feeling. Downward is not always dramatic. Sometimes downward is rest. The deeper chamber seems to keep its own night, not the night of the sky, but a night enclosed by limestone and cooled by the earth. In that night, glowworms may shine where conditions suit them, while mineral forms wait in darkness for water. The cave does not miss the sun. It has other forms of presence, other ways for beauty to appear. A wet surface can glow softly, a living point can shimmer blue-green, a drop can make a sound in the dark. The stalactites themselves are almost like suspended histories of falling, because they grow downward along the same direction the water takes when it leaves them. Yet the formation remains above, recording the moment before descent, holding the mineral part of countless departures. Every drop that falls has left something of itself behind, so the hanging stone is a memory of releases. It is made from what did not fall. It is the stillness left by movement. This paradox feels quietly beautiful, because the cave is full of such reversals. Water removes stone to make chambers, then returns stone to make formations. Darkness hides details, then helps small lights appear. Falling drops build upward mounds on the floor. Nothing here is simple in the shallow sense, yet everything feels calm because the processes unfold without haste. The cave does not resolve its opposites. It holds them. You can let the thought of stalactite formation become slower now, returning again to the basic sequence with less need for explanation. Rain enters soil. Water absorbs carbon dioxide, limestone dissolves, drip water appears, carbon dioxide escapes, calcite forms, and a droplet falls into silence. The sequence repeats so many times that it becomes less like a series of steps and more like a lullaby, written in chemistry. Each part follows gently from the last. Each return makes the shape a little more present. The cave around you receives this lullaby in stone, and you receive it as image, sound, and calm. The stalactites hang above in pale stillness, their tips occasionally brightening with moisture, while the floor below waits under each falling drop. Between ceiling and floor is the cool, dark air, where water travels briefly as sound and motion. That small space is enough to connect the two halves of the chamber. It is enough for time to pass through, and as the passage carries you farther, the darkness seems to deepen without becoming heavy, gathering around the limestone like a soft mineral cloth. The formations are still there, some seen and many unseen, some wet and active, some dry and resting, all belonging to the same slow underground world. The water continues its patient descent through hidden routes above. The cave continues to receive it. The stalactites continue almost imperceptibly to grow. Somewhere above, beyond the limestone roof, another rain may be gathering in the open air, but down here its arrival is only a future possibility. The cave waits without anticipation, because waiting is not separate from its way of being, and the formations do not lean toward the next drop with desire. They simply remain beneath the hidden routes that feed them, holding the marks of every earlier arrival in their pale mineral bodies. The quiet is deep enough to make even possibility feel calm. The stalactites nearest you seem to carry a faint softness along their edges, where calcite is gathered in thin, uneven layers. A young formation may still show the narrow delicacy of its first hollow tube, while an older one may have become broader, heavier, and more textured, its early shape wrapped by centuries of later water. The cave allows these different ages to hang side by side, without separating the new from the ancient. All of them belong to the same ceiling, and all of them are still part of the same slow rain. When water follows a crack through limestone, it may not fall from the first opening it finds, because the inside of the rock is full of tiny decisions made by gravity. It may slide along a bedding plane, gather in a small pocket, then move sideways before descending through another narrow passage. By the time it reaches the cave roof, its path may have curved and paused many times, each turn adding a little more contact with the stone. The droplet you see is therefore the end of a hidden wandering. It has traveled through darkness before it enters darkness again. That hidden wandering gives each drip a slightly different character, though the differences are quiet and often invisible. One drop may carry more dissolved calcium carbonate, another may arrive after moving through soil richer in carbon, and another may be diluted by recent rain that passed quickly through open cracks. The cave receives all of them, and the stalactite records their differences in ways so subtle they may appear only as faint bands, textures, or variations in growth. Nothing needs to be dramatic to become part of the record. The cave remembers gently. You can think of the ceiling as a slow threshold where water changes from a hidden film into a visible bead. At that threshold, the droplet meets the cave air, and the chemistry of dissolved stone begins to lean toward solidness again. The calcium carbonate that had traveled invisibly now gathers as calcite, often at the rim where the water clings before falling. It is a moment of return, a small restoration of mineral to mineral. Then the water lets go, leaving the cave slightly altered. The change is almost too small for ordinary attention. Yet ordinary attention is not the measure that matters here. In the cave's measure, 1,000 small changes become a surface, 100,000 become a taper, and countless more become a long-hanging formation. The stalactite is not built by any single drop, but by the faithfulness of conditions repeated across time. It is made of traces that would seem to vanish if they were not allowed to gather. The cave is patient enough to make the invisible visible. The floor beneath may hold a damp patch where drops have landed for years, and perhaps a low rise of calcite has begun to form there. It is not yet a tall stalagmite, only a rounded suggestion of upward growth, softened by splashing and repeated mineral deposition. The drop that falls from above may spread across this mound, leave a little calcite, and run away as a thinner film. In time, if the drip remains steady, the mound will rise more clearly. For now, it waits close to the floor, modest and quiet. The distance between that low mound and the stalactite above can feel like a vertical measure of time, though time here is not strict or uniform. A steady drip might narrow the space faster by cave standards, while a slower, interrupted drip might leave the two formations separate for immense ages. There is no impatience in the gap, because the cave does not treat meeting as the purpose of growth. The falling water is itself enough. The mineral left behind is itself enough. A chamber like this can hold many unfinished meetings, many places where ceiling and floor seem to be moving toward one another without urgency. Some stalactites may have no visible partner below, while some stalagmites rise beneath drip points whose ceiling forms are small or hidden in shadow. The relationships are not always symmetrical, because water spreads, shifts, splashes, and changes path. Yet the whole chamber feels connected by descent and response. Above and below, stone is being shaped by the same falling water. The cave's sound changes slightly as you imagine moving beside a wall, where the limestone comes nearer and the drops seem closer to your ear. A bead releases from a nearby tip and lands with a soft tap. Then another farther away falls into water with a rounder, deeper note. These sounds do not form a strict rhythm, but they create spaciousness, because each one reveals a different distance within the dark. The cave becomes audible in fragments. Silence holds the rest together. In that silence, the glowworms may seem to float high above an underground stream, their small points of light steady enough to feel like stars, yet living and temporary in their own way. They do not illuminate the stalactites brightly, but they change the feeling of darkness, making it seem inhabited by gentleness. Their threads hang beneath them, fine and nearly invisible, while the mineral forms nearby hang for reasons entirely different and far older. Life suspends itself in the cave air. Stone suspends itself from the cave roof. The presence of both together makes Waitomo feel like a quiet meeting of timescales, where brief living cycles occur beneath geological continuance. A glowworm's light may last through a small part of its life, while a stalactite may continue forming through centuries of rain. The two are not comparable in duration, yet both depend on the cave's damp and closed atmosphere. Both need darkness to reveal what they are. Both become beautiful because the conditions allow them to be subtle. The limestone walls around you may show old signs of water's dissolving work, softened hollows and rounded surfaces that once shaped the flow of underground streams. Those older forms speak of removal, while the stalactites speak of return, and together they make the cave feel complete. The chamber is not only a space carved out from rock, and not only a place where minerals are added back, it is both processes held in one calm body. It is absence made graceful by presence. Where the walls are coated with flowstone, the calcite may look as though it has poured downward and then slowed into pale mineral folds. The appearance can be almost liquid, even though it is solid, because the shape preserves the path of water moving in films. Those films may have been thin enough to appear as a sheen rather than a stream, but they still carried dissolved calcium carbonate and left it behind. Over time, such delicate films make broad features. The cave gives even a thin wetness the power to become form. The stalactites overhead are more focused than flowstone because their growth often begins at a point where water gathers and falls. This point gives them their downward direction, their taper, and the sense that the ceiling is slowly reaching toward the floor. Yet the same chemistry is at work in both features, the same shift from dissolved mineral to solid calcite. The difference lies in motion, in whether water drips, slides, spreads, or lingers. The cave's variety comes from the behavior of water. As your attention moves slowly from one formation to another, you may notice that no two tips are exactly the same. One may hold a droplet like a clear pearl, another may be dry and pale, and another may show a thin thread of moisture descending along one side. These small differences tell of present conditions, of water still moving or resting, of pathways open or paused above the ceiling. A dry tip is not less meaningful than a wet one. It is simply speaking from another part of the cave's history. A formation that is dry today may have been active for a long time before its water supply shifted, and a formation that is active now may someday rest. This shifting does not break the story of the cave because change here is part of continuity. Water finds new roots, old roots close or reopen, and mineral growth follows the paths available to it. The cave does not cling to one pattern. It adapts without haste. The thought of adaptation in stone is soothing because it is not anxious adaptation, not a struggle, but a passive receiving of conditions. A stalactite grows where water arrives, thickens where water flows, rests when water stops, and changes when the drip moves to another edge. It has no need to resist the shape it is becoming. Its form is the trace of what has happened. There is a peace in that kind of acceptance. Above, the soil continues its own quiet work, hosting roots, microbes, and the slow decomposition that enriches groundwater with carbon dioxide. That soil breath becomes part of the cave's mineral process because it helps rainwater dissolve limestone on its way down. The surface ecosystem and the underground formations are linked through this gentle chemistry, even though they seem to belong to different worlds. Grass and root, soil and stone, cave air and calcite all meet through water. The landscape is continuous beneath appearances. Rainwater on its own is already slightly acidic from carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but soil can make it more able to dissolve limestone by adding further carbon dioxide from biological activity. This does not make the water harsh, it makes it quietly effective over long distances and long durations. It enters the limestone with a patient capacity to take mineral into solution. Later, when conditions change in the cave air, the same mineral is laid down again. What dissolved in one setting precipitates in another. This back and forth movement gives karst landscapes their special character, because they are shaped by the mobility of limestone in water. Solid rock becomes dissolved lode becomes calcite deposit, and each transition depends on conditions that may be invisible to the eye. The cave is a place where geology behaves almost like a slow fluid system. Stone travels, but only when carried by water. Then it rests again, hanging from the ceiling in pale forms. The word slow is important here, but it does not mean inactive. The Waitomo Caves are full of activity that has been stretched so wide in time that it feels like stillness to a passing visitor. Water seeps, gases exchange, calcite gathers, microbes live, insects move, streams carry sediment, and formations grow or rest. The calm is not the absence of process. It is process without hurry. You can let that understanding settle into the body, especially if you are listening in the dark with your own room quiet around you. The imagined cave becomes a place where rest is not emptiness, but gentle continuation. Your breathing can slow without stopping, your thoughts can loosen without disappearing, and the mind can remain aware in a softer way. The stalactites overhead continue forming by increments beyond the reach of effort. Nothing needs to be pushed. In some parts of the cave, the limestone ceiling may be uneven enough that water gathers along small ledges before finding a final point to drip. This can create formations that begin not as perfect narrow straws, but as irregular clusters or thicker deposits where water has spread before falling. The cave does not require a single ideal shape from every droplet. It uses the surfaces it has, and the formations emerge from those surfaces. Their irregularity makes them feel more deeply natural. A thin crack may feed a row of stalactites, each one hanging below the line where water has repeatedly entered the chamber. From below, that row can look like a delicate mineral fringe, tracing the hidden fracture above. The crack itself may be mostly invisible, but the hanging forms reveal its presence, like dew revealing a spider's thread in morning light. In the cave, water reveals structure by depositing stone along it. The hidden becomes visible through patience. Elsewhere, a single isolated drip may form one stalactite alone, hanging from a high dark ceiling like a quiet pendulum that never swings. Its tip may be far above the floor, and the drops that fall from it may travel a long distance through air. The longer fall can influence the deposit below, spreading impact and splash across a wider area. Above, the stalactite remains narrow or thick according to its own flow conditions. Below, the floor records the fall differently. This relationship between fall height and deposition is another small way the cave turns physics into form. A drop falling farther gathers speed, lands with more energy, and may spread mineral across a broader surface, while a shorter fall may keep the deposit more concentrated. The stalagmite below, if one grows, carries the evidence of that descent in its shape. Even the space between ceiling and floor matters. The empty air participates. The cave air itself may feel unmoving, yet it can have subtle circulation, influenced by entrances, temperature differences, water movement, and chamber geometry. These faint currents can affect evaporation and carbon dioxide exchange at the droplet's surface, changing how and where calcite forms. Such effects are usually gentle, but over long periods, gentle effects are enough. A formation can lean, thicken, or develop surface textures because the air around it was not exactly the same everywhere. The invisible leaves traces on the visible. This is one of the quiet wonders of cave science, that things too subtle to feel in a moment can become clear in stone across time. A tiny shift in airflow, a slight change in drip chemistry, a seasonal difference in water supply, or a thin coating of mineral can all contribute to a visible form. The cave is sensitive, not fragile in the sense of fear, but responsive in the sense of listening. It listens through calcite. It answers in shape. You may imagine the stalactites as sentences written downward, each one composed of droplets rather than words. Some sentences are long and slender, some are thick with clauses of mineral, some pause and then resume in a different tone. The ceiling becomes a manuscript of water, though it is not meant to be read quickly. It asks for a slower literacy, one that can accept repetition as meaning. In that slower reading, the cave becomes generous. The more gently you look, the less the formations seem ornamental and the more they seem inevitable, as if the cave has simply become what its conditions invited. This inevitability is peaceful because it has no force behind it, only continuance. The stalactite did not decide to be graceful, and the water did not decide to create beauty. The beauty emerged because physical laws and time were allowed to remain together. There is calm in beauty that does not strain. Some formations may appear almost translucent along thin edges, especially curtains and young calcite sheets where light can pass through the mineral. Those edges may show warm bands, amber and cream, marking subtle changes in what the water carried. Each band is a trace of different conditions above or within the cave, translated into color. The effect is gentle, like light passing through honeyed stone. It makes the cave feel quietly luminous even where darkness is deep. Stalactites, too, can hold faint banding, though their shape may make the layers less obvious from below. A cross-section would show more, but the cave does not need to be opened to be known gently. You can understand that every surface has depth. Every outer layer has older layers beneath it, and every visible form contains a hidden interior shaped by previous water. The outside is only the current face of a longer mineral memory. The inside remains quiet. There is a kind of kindness in leaving that interior undisturbed, because the cave's wholeness matters more than complete seeing. To stand beneath a stalactite and not touch it, not break it, not ask it to reveal everything, is to accept the privacy of natural processes. The formation can remain intact, continuing to receive water, if water still comes. The unseen layers can remain folded inside. Wonder does not require possession. As you drift along the underground passage in thought, the cave roof may seem to follow you like an ancient, uneven sky. Instead of clouds, it holds limestone and calcite. Instead of stars, it may hold glowworms in the distance, shining where the chamber opens near water. The stalactites hang like slow weather, a mineral rain suspended for centuries. The floor receives their drops with patience. The walls hold the low returning sound. The comparison to weather feels natural, because caves have their own internal climates, quieter than the open sky but deeply important to what grows there. Humidity, temperature, carbon dioxide, airflow, and water supply form a hidden climate of stone. Stalactites are shaped by that climate, just as trees above are shaped by sunlight, rainfall, and soil. The difference is that cave climate works in darkness and leaves mineral rings instead of leaves. Its seasons are measured by drip and pause. Some changes from season to season may be very small, especially in deeper parts of the cave, where temperature remains steady. Yet rainfall patterns above can still influence how frequently water reaches certain drip points. and those changes can become part of the formation's record. A wetter period may bring more active dripping, while a drier period may slow deposition or leave a tip temporarily dry. The cave receives these surface rhythms in a softened way. It turns them into mineral nuance. This softening is central to the cave's atmosphere because nothing from the surface arrives unchanged. Light becomes darkness, rain becomes drip, soil breath becomes chemistry, and ancient marine stone becomes hanging calcite. The world above is not denied, but transformed. In that transformation, the cave feels separate enough to be peaceful and connected enough to feel alive. It is hidden, but not cut off. The path may pass near a place where water runs down a wall in such a thin layer that it is more shimmer than stream. Over time, that shimmer can leave a smooth flowstone coating, thickening the wall with calcite in rounded folds. If the flow is steady, the surface may appear polished and soft, and if it changes, the coating may show terraces, ripples, or subtle ridges. The wall becomes another place where water slows into stone. The cave's vertical surfaces are as patient as its ceiling. At the edge of a pool, calcite may gather in delicate rims, especially where water loses carbon dioxide and mineral settles out at the boundary with air. These pool deposits are quieter cousins of the stalactites, formed not by falling drops, but by still water holding and releasing mineral. They show that the same chemistry can make many landscapes inside one cave. A ceiling taper, a wall cascade, a floor mound, and a pool rim can all arise from the same basic exchange. The cave varies the music without changing the key. The stalactites remain the downward notes in that music, and their shape keeps returning your attention to gravity. Every tip points along the path a droplet will take, from ceiling into darkness, from hidden root into open air, from suspended bead into landing sound. The forms are calm because gravity is calm here, steady and unarguing. It does not pull dramatically. It simply continues. The cave accepts that continuation and builds with it. If you imagine lying beneath the thought of these formations, they may become almost like slow pendants above the mind, not heavy, but anchoring in their quietness. Each one suggests a long downward settling, a gathering of mineral that has no need to announce itself. Your own thoughts can follow that settling, becoming less scattered, less bright, and more rounded at the edges. The cave's time gives permission for human time to soften. The night can deepen without urgency. There is also a comfort in the idea that the cave contains many processes at once, none of them competing for attention. A drip feeds a stalactite. A stream moves in another passage, glowworms shine above water, and microbes live in thin films on rock. The chamber holds them all without noise. It does not need to arrange them into a hierarchy. Everything belongs by being part of the conditions. This belonging feels especially clear when you think of the limestone's ancient origin in marine life. The shells and fragments that became the rock were once part of living ecosystems, and now that material supports caves, formations, water routes, and present cave life. The old ocean has not disappeared. It has changed state, changed location, changed pace. It rests now as stone under green hills, and it glows faintly at stalactite tips when water passes over it. The past is not gone in the cave. It is mineral. A single drop falling from a stalactite can therefore carry an almost impossible continuity, though it remains simple to see and hear. It contains recent rain, soil chemistry, dissolved limestone, cave air exchange, and the inheritance of ancient seas. When it falls, it makes a small sound and is gone from sight, yet its mineral trace remains overhead. This is the way the cave joins vastness and intimacy. It makes the immense quiet enough to hold in one bead. You might stay with that bead for a while, letting everything else grow indistinct around it. The droplet slowly swells, and the cave around it seems to pause, though really the processes continue in many places at once. Its surface reflects a small, dim world, curved and inverted, holding darkness and stone in a trembling shape. It grows heavier through accumulation, not decision. Then it falls, and the tip begins again. Again does not mean repetition without meaning. Again means continuity, the return of a condition, the next small offering of water to calcite. The next moment in a mineral practice that has lasted longer than memory. The caves again is not a drum beat because its timing is uneven and soft. It is more like breathing during sleep, sometimes deeper, sometimes lighter, always continuing. The stalactite is shaped by that gentle again. If the drop falls into a pool, the surface opens in a ring that travels outward, touches stone, and disappears. If it falls onto a stalagmite, it breaks and spreads, leaving mineral across the top before slipping down the sides. If it falls onto bare rock, it may darken the surface for a moment and then move away along a tiny slope. Each landing matters differently. The descent is shared, but the receiving place changes the result. This idea of receiving is woven through the whole cave because limestone receives rain, cracks receive water, cave air receives carbon dioxide, and mineral surfaces receive calcite. The listener, too, can receive the scene without needing to solve it or hold it tightly. The cave is not a puzzle tonight, but a place to rest attention. Science is present, but it moves slowly, like a current beneath still water. Understanding can be calm. As the imagined path bends, you may pass beneath a cluster of thin stalactites, each one catching a little moisture at its tip. They hang close together where the rock above has allowed several small roots to meet the ceiling. Some are active and shining, while others are pale and dry, and the difference between them feels like the difference between waking and sleeping. The active ones are not more alive in a human sense, but they are presently receiving water. The dry ones hold older rain. The cave is full of old rain. It hangs overhead in calcite tapers, rests underfoot in flowstone, rises from the floor in stalagmites, and traces walls in pale sheets. Each deposit is rain that once moved through soil and stone, leaving part of itself behind as mineral. Even when the water has long since flowed away, the cave keeps its memory in solid form. To stand inside the chamber is to stand inside weather that has become geology. This transformation from weather to geology is so slow that it becomes soothing to think about. The mind can follow rain downward through the hills, through roots and dark pores, through limestone fractures, and into the cave's cool air. It can watch a droplet form, release carbon dioxide, deposit calcite, and fall. It can imagine that happening again after another rain, and another, across seasons and generations. The sequence lengthens without becoming tense. In the deepest calm of the cave, even growth itself feels less like progress and more like presence. A stalactite is not racing toward a final length, and a chamber is not waiting to become complete. The formations are simply continuing under the conditions given to them, and their beauty exists at every stage. A new ring of calcite is as much the cave as an ancient column. A small straw is as much the cave as a broad mineral curtain. This can be a gentle thought to carry into sleep, because it loosens the need for finishing. The cave does not measure itself by completion, but by ongoing relationship between water and stone. Each drop is part of that relationship, whether it builds visibly or almost invisibly. Each pause is part of it too, because pauses belong to natural rhythms. Nothing here is late. The darkness deepens, but it remains friendly in its indifference, cool and spacious around the pale shapes. You may imagine the stalactites becoming less distinct now, their outlines softened by shadow, while the sound of dripping becomes the clearest guide. One drop, then a long quiet, then another from somewhere beyond sight, each one marking the chamber without disturbing it. The cave does not need to be fully seen to be felt. Its presence arrives through patience. The glowworms, if they are near, shine with a steadiness that seems almost mineral, though their light belongs to life. They make the darkness tender, adding a faint blue hush above the water, while the stalactites hold their own pale silence nearby. The living lights may come and go through generations, but the cave remains, receiving water and giving back form. This difference in duration does not make one less beautiful than the other. It simply lets the chamber hold more than one kind of time. At the edge of hearing, an underground stream may move through a passage, its sound low and continuous compared with the scattered drops. The stream carries water onward, while the stalactites hold mineral back, creating a gentle contrast between motion and remaining. Some of the same water that dripped from a ceiling may eventually join that stream, leaving a trace above and continuing below. The cave allows water to be both builder and traveler. It keeps part of the journey and releases the rest. The stream may also carry dissolved minerals away from one part of the cave, while other waters deposit them elsewhere, reminding you that no single place contains the whole process. Karst is a landscape of connections, and the Waitomo Caves are part of a larger underground pattern of flow, dissolution, and deposition. A chamber is a pause within that pattern, a place where air has entered and calcite can gather. The stalactite is one visible sign of the wider system. It points downward, but it also points outward into the hidden network. You can sense the network without seeing it, just as you can sense roots under soil or currents under a calm sea. The cave's hidden passages do not need to be visible to have presence. They feed the drips, guide the streams, shape the humidity, and connect chambers to the surface above. Every formation is evidence of a route. Every drop is a messenger from the unseen. This unseen quality is part of why the cave feels restful rather than empty. It holds more than it reveals, but not in a threatening way, only in the ordinary way that deep natural places always hold more than the eye can reach. The darkness is not withholding something sharp, it is simply spacious, allowing the imagination to settle without needing every boundary. The stalactites emerge from that spaciousness as pale reminders of slow continuity. They are enough. In the same way, sleep does not require every thought to be completed before it arrives. It comes when the mind begins to trust the darkness, when unfinished things can remain unfinished for a while, and when awareness can soften around the edges of breath. The cave offers an image of that trust. It lets water continue its work without supervision. It lets time lengthen without concern. The stalactites above you seem to hold that trust in their very shapes, tapering downward through centuries of quiet conditions. Their tips are precise because droplets are precise, and their bodies are irregular because natural conditions are full of variation. This blend of order and imperfection gives them their calm beauty. They are not manufactured smoothness. They are the slow handwriting of a real place. If a lamp passes over one formation, the wet areas brighten first, then the pale calcite body, then the darker bands where mineral impurities have gently marked the surface. The light moves on, and the stalactite returns to shadow, still present, still receiving or resting according to its own conditions. The brief illumination changes only your awareness, not the formation. The cave continues in darkness before and after being seen. This too is peaceful. The process continues above countless points across the chamber, each one a quiet chemistry of water and air. Carbon dioxide leaves droplets, calcite precipitates, surface tension releases, and gravity carries the remaining water downward into the hush. The words can sound technical, but the action itself is simple and soft when imagined slowly. Water arrives with stone inside it, air helps the stone return. The drop falls away. In some formations, the early hollow tube may still be active, with water traveling through the center and forming drops at the open end. In others, that opening has closed, and water now moves across the outer surface, adding thickness rather than length alone. This shift can create stalactites with complex inner histories, where an original straw lies hidden beneath later layers. The cave does not display every stage openly. It preserves some beginnings inside the forms they became. There is a quiet resemblance here to memory, where early experiences remain inside later shapes. Not always visible, but still part of what is present. The stalactite's first narrow beginning may be concealed beneath calcite, yet the entire formation depends on it. Later, water could not have thickened that shape if the first drip point had never formed. The cave builds over origins, but it does not undo them. It carries them inward. As you continue drifting through the cave in thought, the path may narrow, and the formations may seem closer, though everything remains slow and careful. The stone walls hold a coolness that feels steady, and the air carries the scent of wet limestone, faint earth, and stillness. A drip falls from somewhere ahead, and the sound guides you without pulling you. You move at the speed of attention. The cave allows this. The stalactites in a narrower passage may be smaller, where the ceiling shape, water supply, or airflow differs from the broader chambers. Even small formations can carry great age, because size depends on growth conditions as much as duration. A tiny straw may have grown slowly through dry conditions, while a thicker neighbor may have received richer or more frequent water. The cave resists simple judgments. It invites careful wonder. This careful wonder is the mood that suits Waitomo's underground world because the place is both scientifically understandable and deeply atmospheric. You can know about calcium carbonate, carbon dioxide, drip rates, and karst hydrology, while still feeling the mystery of pale stone hanging in darkness. Facts do not remove the softness. They make the softness deeper because they show how much patience is involved in every visible form. The more precisely you understand the drop, the more remarkable the stalactite becomes. And still, understanding does not need to hurry. You can let the facts drift by like slow particles in clear water, each one settling where it belongs. Limestone dissolves, calcite returns, water descends, air receives gas, and the cave grows by increments. These ideas do not need to be held tightly. They can rest in the background like the sound of dripping. The narration of the cave is already written in stone. At a certain point, the difference between listening and imagining begins to soften, and the cave becomes an interior landscape of its own. The stalactites overhead may blend with the quiet ceiling of a darkened room, and the drip sounds may become the rhythm of sleepiness. You are not trying to go anywhere quickly. You are simply letting yourself descend into a slower scale where water works gently and time does not press. The cave has been doing this long before this moment, and it will continue after attention fades. Another drop will gather. Another minute trace of calcite may remain. Another small sound will move through darkness. The formations will hang, the glowworms will shine where their conditions persist, and the limestone will keep its ancient sea memory under the hills. Nothing asks to be finished tonight. The cave continues, and you can rest beside that continuance. As the path opens again, the chamber's roof seems to lift into a darkness full of barely visible mineral points, and the floor feels quieter beneath you. The stalactites above are fewer here, perhaps because water reaches this part of the ceiling less often, or because the roots through the rock take another direction. The spaces between formations are wider, and each hanging shape feels more solitary. A single drip in such a place seems especially spacious. It falls through a larger silence. That larger silence gives room for the imagination to notice the long journey from cloud to cave again. But even more slowly now. A cloud gathers moisture, rain falls on Waitomo's greenland, water enters soil, dissolves limestone, slips through hidden openings, and arrives as a clear bead. The bead hangs from calcite in the cool cave air, changes chemically, leaves mineral, and falls. Each stage is gentle. Each stage belongs. The stalactite grows because this belonging continues through time, and the cave remains peaceful because its processes do not demand attention while they happen. They are content to be quiet, content to build in darkness, content to record the passage of rain in layers no one may see. This is one of the deepest comforts of natural landscapes, that so much of them continues without performance. The cave is beautiful, without needing to be watched. Its beauty is part of its being. In the Waitomo Caves, the slow formation of stalactites is therefore not only a matter of chemistry, though chemistry is the pathway. It is also an atmosphere of patience, a collaboration between ancient marine limestone, present rain, hidden soil breath, cave air, gravity, and time. Each droplet participates in a larger pattern, and each formation holds that pattern in suspended shape. The result is not loud, bright, or urgent. It is calm enough to sleep within. You may let the chamber grow dimmer in your mind, while the pale formations fade into softer outlines above. The sound of water remains, occasional and tender, each drop arriving from a hidden root and falling into a depth you do not need to measure. The cave continues beneath the hills, receiving rain, releasing silence and growing stone from almost nothing. You can rest with that image. You can drift with the water as it moves downward, slowly, gently, into the patient dark.